The nanny served a soup with a suspicious color, but I had a plan. Richard Thompson stared at the plate of dark green soup that had just been served at his table, feeling his stomach churn as he pretended to consider taking the first spoonful. Over the past 2 months since he had hired that woman recommended by his sister-in-law, a strange feeling had taken over his home in Manhattan Beach. That's when Emily appeared, whispering that she didn't want to have that soup again because it made her stomach hurt. The nanny insisted it was a nutritious family recipe, but Richard knew something was wrong. The 42-year-old businessman had lost his wife Catherine in a traffic accident a year ago, and since then he had struggled to balance the business of the construction company he inherited from his father with caring for his 8-year-old daughter. When Jennifer, his sister-in-law and Catherine's younger sister, suggested Dorothy to take care of Emily, it seemed like the perfect solution. Dorothy Williams arrived with excellent recommendations and a caring manner that won Emily over immediately. A 50-year-old woman with graying hair always tied in an impeccable bun, who spoke softly and moved through the house like an efficient shadow. "Daddy, I don't want this soup again," murmured Emily, pushing the plate away. "Sweetie, this soup has spinach and kale. It will make you strong like Wonder Woman," said Dorothy with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Richard observed the greenish color of the thick liquid, almost brown in some spots, and felt something tighten in his chest. In recent weeks, Emily had been losing her appetite, complaining of stomach aches and having constant nightmares. The doctors he consulted found nothing wrong, only suggesting more patience with the child's grieving process. "Let me try it first," said Richard, picking up the spoon. The moment the soup touched his tongue, a metallic and bitter taste exploded in his mouth. He disguised his grimace and swallowed with difficulty, noticing how Dorothy watched his every move with excessive attention. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "It's very tasty, Dorothy. Could you give me the recipe?" "My mother would love to know," lied Richard, while discreetly taking his cell phone out of his pocket. "Oh, Mr. Richard, it's a family secret. My grandmother taught me when I was a girl back in the countryside of Louisiana," replied Dorothy, drying her hands on her apron. "But if you want, I can make more tomorrow." Emily fidgeted restlessly in her chair, nervously playing with a doll that Catherine had given her on the last Children's Day. The girl had her mother's eyes, green like emeralds, and the curly hair that Richard made sure to comb every morning since he became a widower. "Dad, can I go play in my room?" asked Emily, in a voice that seemed smaller than usual. "Yes, honey. But first have at least 3 spoonfuls of the soup," said Richard, watching how Dorothy's expression subtly changed. While Emily reluctantly obeyed, Richard memorized every detail of the nanny's reaction. Dorothy moved around the kitchen with a haste she didn't have minutes before, putting away pots and cleaning surfaces that were already clean. The phone rang and Dorothy answered quickly, speaking in a low voice. Richard pretended to read emails on his cell phone, but managed to catch a few words. Plan, more time, and patience. When she hung up, her behavior changed again to the usual sweet and caring demeanor. "Mr. Richard, I'm going to get some natural remedies at the pharmacy for Emily. She's been a bit weak lately, don't you think?" "What kind of remedies?" asked Richard, alarmed. "Vitamins, mineral salts, nothing major." "I have a pharmacist friend who always recommends the best things for children," replied Dorothy, already picking up her purse. Richard felt a chill down his spine. Over the past few weeks, Emily had been taking some vitamins that Dorothy prepared in the morning, mixed into the orange juice. The girl always complained about the bad taste, but the nanny insisted they were important for her growth. "Dorothy, I think it's better if we talk with Emily's pediatrician first. I don't want to medicate my daughter without medical guidance," said Richard, trying to sound casual. "Of course, Mr. Richard, you're the boss," she replied, but Richard noticed how her fingers tightened around the purse handle. After Dorothy left, Richard went up to Emily's room. The girl was lying in bed, hugging her doll, staring at the ceiling with a distant expression that worried him more and more. "Emily, can I talk with you for a little bit?" "Sure, Dad." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing his daughter's curls. "How do you feel when you take those vitamins that Dorothy prepares?" The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip like she did when she was nervous. Kind of sick, and I get sleepy. But she said I can't tell you because otherwise you'll worry for no reason. A wave of anger rushed through Richard's body. Sweetheart, you can tell me anything, always. Promise? I promise, Dad, but... Emily looked at the door, checking if they were alone. Aunt Dorothy said that if I don't take the vitamins, I might get sick like Mommy did. Richard swallowed hard. Catherine had gone through a period of depression before the accident, taking several medications prescribed by her psychiatrist. Dorothy was using that painful memory to manipulate his daughter. Emily, your mother didn't get sick from not taking vitamins. And you are healthy, my love. If anyone says you need to take something, tell me first, okay? The girl nodded, but Richard could see she was still confused. Dorothy had created a web of fear around Emily, using the memory of her mother as an emotional weapon. That afternoon, while Dorothy was shopping, Richard called Jennifer, his sister-in-law. The 35-year-old woman had always been close to Catherine, and after losing her sister, she had become a constant presence in their lives. Jennifer, I need to talk with you about Dorothy. What's wrong, Richard? Isn't she taking good care of Emily? It's complicated. I have some concerns. She's giving Emily vitamins without my permission, making strange soups, and Emily is getting weak. There was a long pause on the line. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice sounded tense. Richard, you're being paranoid. Dorothy is an excellent woman with years of experience. You're the one who's been working too much and not realizing that Emily is still processing the loss of Catherine. But Jennifer, you haven't seen how thin and pale Emily is. She lost her mother, Richard. It's normal for her to be like that. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. The call ended abruptly, leaving Richard with more questions than answers. Jennifer had always been protective of Catherine and now with Emily, but her reaction seemed strange, almost too defensive. That night, after Dorothy left, Richard decided to investigate the maid's room where she kept her personal things. He found a small notebook written in tiny, cramped handwriting. The notes were about medication schedules, Emily's reactions, and strangely, money amounts. Strong vitamin, E was dizzy for 2 hours, said an entry from 3 days ago. Green soup, rejected but drank half a bowl after insisting, from a week ago. And at the bottom of the page, a number that made Richard freeze, 15,000, first payment. Richard photographed the pages with trembling hands. Dorothy was being paid by someone to do something to Emily, and from the symptoms her daughter was showing, that something wasn't good at all. The next morning, Richard pretended to leave for work as usual, but hid in the corner coffee shop with a view of his building. At 9 o'clock, he saw Jennifer arriving at the building. Strange, since she hadn't mentioned she would come. Richard waited another hour before going up. When he opened the apartment door, he heard low voices coming from the kitchen. He walked silently down the hallway and stopped near the door, where he could hear the conversation without being seen. You have to be more patient, Dorothy. These things take time, Jennifer was saying, but she's resisting more and more. Today she spit out half of her vitamin, and Richard is getting suspicious, Dorothy replied. Then increase the dose in the soup. Mix it well with strong spices to disguise it. When she becomes more debilitated, we'll have enough grounds to question his capability as a father. Richard felt his blood run cold. His sister-in-law and the nanny were working together to make Emily sick. But why? What if he takes her to the doctor? Asked Dorothy. The tests won't show anything concrete. They're symptoms that can be explained by stress, grief, poor nutrition, things that an absent father can cause, Jennifer replied coldly. Richard had to lean against the wall. The woman he considered a second mother to Emily was orchestrating a plan to make his daughter sick. Jennifer, I don't feel good about doing this to a child. Dorothy, do you want your $15,000 or not? Jennifer's voice turned hard. Catherine left a life insurance policy of $200,000 for Emily. If I get custody of her, I can manage that money until she turns 18. It's more than enough to solve my problems, and there's still plenty left for you. Richard closed his eyes, trying to process what he had just heard. Jennifer was having financial problems and saw Emily as a source of money. The nanny was being paid to make the girl sick enough to justify a change of custody. He'll suspect if she gets too sick all at once, murmured Dorothy. That's why we have to be gradual. Another month like this, and any judge will see that he's not fit to care for her alone. A businessman who works 12 hours a day, a child always sick. It's not hard to convince anyone. Richard slowly retreated, going up to the Home Office where he kept important documents. With trembling hands, he looked for Catherine's life insurance policy. It was all there, $200,000 for Emily, with him as responsible for managing it until she turned 18. In case of the father's incapacity or unsuitability, responsibility would pass to the closest relative on the maternal side. Jennifer. Richard's phone vibrated with a message. I arrived early today. Has Emily had breakfast? Kisses, Dorothy. Richard took a deep breath. They didn't know he had discovered the plan. This gave him a crucial advantage. He went downstairs pretending everything was normal. Good morning, Jennifer. What a surprise to see you here so early, said Richard, entering the kitchen where the two women were talking. Hi, Richard. I came to bring some toys I bought for Emily. How is she feeling today? Jennifer smiled, but Richard noticed tension in her eyes. A bit weak, poor thing. Dorothy was telling me she thinks it's better to take her to the doctor, Richard lied, testing them. The two exchanged a quick glance that Richard pretended not to notice. No need to exaggerate, Richard. They're just normal symptoms for a child who's still grieving, Jennifer said quickly. You're the one who's been very anxious. Maybe you're right, Richard agreed. Dorothy, could you prepare that special soup for Emily for lunch? She seems to like it. Of course, Mr. Richard, Dorothy smiled. Richard knew he needed to act quickly, but carefully. If he confronted the two directly, they could deny everything and maybe even accelerate the plan. He needed concrete proof. During the morning, he pretended to work in his office while developing a strategy. First, he would collect samples of the soup and vitamins for analysis. Second, he would document everything he could about Dorothy's behavior. Third, he would investigate Jennifer's financial situation. When Dorothy started preparing lunch, Richard went downstairs with a tiny recorder hidden in his jacket pocket. It was equipment he used in important meetings, small enough to go unnoticed. Dorothy, can I help with anything? Offered Richard. No need, Mr. Richard. You already work too much. Let me take care of everything here, she replied, cutting green leaves that Richard couldn't completely identify. He noticed that besides the spinach and kale she had mentioned, Dorothy added other dark leaves from a small plastic bag she kept in a specific cupboard. She also poured a clear liquid from a small bottle. What seasoning is that? Asked Richard casually. A natural extract that helps with the children's digestion. I buy it at a health food store in Chelsea, replied Dorothy, quickly putting the bottle away. Richard memorized the name of the store she mentioned. Later, he would investigate what products they sold there. When Dorothy got distracted, answering the phone, Richard quickly filled an empty small medicine bottle with the still hot soup, hiding it in his jacket's inner pocket. Emily, come for lunch, called Dorothy. The girl came downstairs, dragging her feet, clearly unwilling to eat. Richard noticed she was paler than last week and had dark circles under her eyes. Dad, my stomach feels a bit weird, said Emily, sitting at the table. What exactly do you feel? Asked Richard, concerned. Like there are angry butterflies flying around in there, and sometimes I get a bit dizzy when I stand up quickly. Dorothy quickly interrupted. It's just gas, dear. The soup will help regulate your bowels. But Richard saw something in Emily's eyes that alarmed him even more. The girl wasn't just reluctant to eat. She was afraid. Genuine fear. Dorothy, I think Emily needs a day of light foods. How about we make a simple sandwich today? Suggested Richard. But Mr. Richard, she needs the vitamins in the soup. She's at an important growth stage, insisted Dorothy, serving a generous portion on Emily's plate. No, not today. I'll make her a sandwich, said Richard firmly. Dorothy's expression changed for the first time since she had worked there. For a second, Richard saw genuine irritation cross her face before she smiled again. As you wish. I'll put the soup in the refrigerator then. While Richard prepared the sandwich, he noticed Dorothy was texting urgently. He needed to find out who she was communicating with. In the afternoon, after Dorothy left for her shopping, Richard called a private lab he had used for company tests. Dr. Roberts, it's Richard Thompson. I need an urgent and discreet analysis of a food sample. Is it possible today? Of course, Richard. What kind of analysis do you need? I want to know all the components, especially if there's any substance that could cause discomfort in children. An hour later, Richard was at the lab delivering the soup sample. Dr. Roberts, a 60-year-old man who had known Richard for nearly a decade, promised results within 24 hours. Back at the apartment, Richard found Emily watching cartoons on the sofa, looking a bit more cheerful without Dorothy's presence. "Dad, can I ask you something?" said Emily, pausing the television. "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." "Do you like Aunt Dorothy?" The question caught Richard by surprise. "Why are you asking that?" "I don't know. Sometimes she gets mad when you're not here, and she always talks about Mommy like it was your fault that she had the accident." Richard felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean, sweetheart? What does she say about Mommy?" Emily shifted uncomfortably. "She said Mommy was sad because you worked too much, and that if you don't change, I could lose my father too." Richard had to control himself to keep from exploding with anger. Dorothy was psychologically manipulating his daughter, using grief and the fear of abandonment as tools of control. "Emily, look at me," said Richard, gently holding the girl's face. "I will never abandon you. And what happened to Mommy was an accident. It was nobody's fault. Do you understand?" "I understand, Dad, but you really do work a lot." Richard sighed. It was true. In the months after losing Catherine, he had buried himself in work as a way to deal with the pain. But he was making it look like neglect in Emily's eyes, giving ammunition to anyone who wanted to question his ability as a father. "I will cut back on my work hours, I promise. How about I pick you up from school tomorrow and we go get some ice cream?" Emily's face lit up for the first time in weeks. "Really, Dad? You won't be in a meeting?" "I won't, sweetheart. In fact, I'm going to cancel some meetings so we can spend more time together." When Dorothy returned, Richard was playing with dolls with Emily in the living room. He noticed how the nanny seemed surprised, almost bothered, to see father and daughter interacting happily. "It's so good to see you two having fun," said Dorothy, but her voice sounded forced. "Dad said he's going to work less to spend more time with me," Emily announced cheerfully. Richard clearly saw the displeasure cross Dorothy's face before she composed herself. "That's wonderful news. I'm sure it will be good for both of you," she said, heading to the kitchen. Richard followed her. "Dorothy, thank you for everything you've done for us. I know it hasn't been easy caring for a grieving child." "It's my duty, Mr. Thompson. Emily is a special girl." "Yes, she is. And for that very reason, I think we should stop those vitamins for now. I'm taking her to the pediatrician tomorrow for a full evaluation." Richard watched Dorothy's reaction closely. She forced a smile, but her hands moved nervously to her apron. "Of course, whatever you think is best. But it can't hurt to continue with the basic vitamins, right? Just some vitamin C, things like that." "I'd rather wait for the doctor's guidance," said Richard firmly. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Richard discreetly installed a tiny security camera in the kitchen, hidden behind a condiment jar. He had bought the equipment years ago to monitor construction sites, never imagining he would use it in his own home. The next morning, Richard left for work at the usual time, but returned 2 hours later, claiming he had forgotten important documents. Dorothy was in the kitchen preparing something in the blender. "What are you making, Dorothy?" asked Richard. "A natural smoothie for Emily. Fruits, honey, some good herbs for immunity," she replied, quickly putting a lid on the blender. "Can I see what fruits? Emily is allergic to some," Richard lied. "Banana, apple, strawberry?" "Nothing special," said Dorothy, but Richard noticed she had put some packets of powder in a specific drawer. "Dorothy, I've changed my mind about the vitamins. We are stopping them completely until we talk to the pediatrician." This time Dorothy couldn't disguise her irritation. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, this girl needs nutrients. She is very thin." "She'll be fine with regular food for a few days," insisted Richard. "All right, but when she gets worse, don't come complaining to me," said Dorothy, pouring the blender's contents down the sink. The phrase sounded like a threat, disguised as concern. That afternoon, Richard received a call from Dr. Roberts. "Richard, the test results are ready. Can you come pick them up? Can you give me any information over the phone?" "I'd prefer you come here. It's better we talk in person." The doctor's serious tone made Richard even more worried. He told Dorothy he needed to quickly leave for a meeting and went straight to the lab. Dr. Roberts greeted him in his office with a grave expression. "Richard, this soup contains dangerously high levels of iron and potassium. We also found traces of a substance called senna, which is a powerful natural laxative. Is this dangerous for a child?" "Very. Excess iron can cause nausea, abdominal pain, weakness, and dizziness. Too much potassium affects heart rhythm, and senna can cause severe dehydration in children. Who prepared this?" "My daughter's nanny. She said it was a family recipe." Dr. Roberts shook his head. "Richard, no family recipe would have these concentrations. This was deliberately prepared to cause harm. You need to keep your daughter away from this person immediately." Richard left the lab with a copy of the results and a growing sense of urgency. Dorothy wasn't just being negligent, she was systematically poisoning Emily. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. When he got home, Richard found Emily lying on the couch, visibly unwell. Dorothy was in the kitchen preparing another one of her natural remedies. "What happened?" asked Richard. "Emily got sick after her snack, vomiting and diarrhea. I gave her some calming teas," replied Dorothy. Richard went upstairs to see Emily. The girl was pale with dry lips. "Sweetie, what snack did you eat?" "A yogurt that Aunt Dorothy made. It tasted strange, but she said it would help me get strong." Richard felt a mix of anger and desperation. Even after he had forbidden the vitamins, Dorothy kept medicating Emily in secret. "Emily, from now on, you only eat things that I give you, okay?" "Okay, Dad. But what if Aunt Dorothy gets mad?" "Don't worry about that. Daddy will take care of everything." Richard went downstairs and confronted Dorothy discreetly. "Dorothy, what yogurt did you give Emily?" "A homemade yogurt with probiotics. She was constipated." "I told you not to give her anything without my permission." "Mr. Thompson, it was just yogurt. The girl needed—" "Dorothy, I need you to understand. Nothing else for Emily without me knowing. Absolutely nothing." Richard saw her hands tremble slightly. Dorothy was losing control of the situation. That night, Richard pretended to sleep and at 2 in the morning went down silently to check the kitchen. Dorothy had left some jars in the refrigerator that he didn't recognize. He collected small samples of 3 different liquids and stored them in sterile containers he had bought. The next morning, Richard called his secretary and cancelled all his appointments for the week. "An emergency, Mr. Thompson?" she asked. "A family situation. I'll be working from home for the next few days." Richard's constant presence clearly bothered Dorothy. She seemed nervous, checking her phone constantly and going out to the pharmacy twice in the same day. During one of these outings, Richard took the opportunity to have a serious talk with Emily. "Sweetie, I need you to tell me everything that Dorothy gives you to eat or drink, even the things she told me not to tell." Emily hesitated, chewing her lower lip. "She's going to be mad at me." "Emily, you're my daughter, and I'll always protect you. Dorothy works for me, not the other way around. She gives me some bitter drops in my juice every morning and puts a white powder in my water. She said it's so I don't get sick like Mommy did." Richard felt his breathing quicken. "How long has she been doing this?" "Since she started working here. At first I liked it because she said it was magic, that it would protect me, but now it just makes me nauseous." "Did you save any of what she gave you?" Emily nodded and ran upstairs to her room. She came back with a small bottle of drops she had hidden under the mattress. "I hid it because the taste is really bad. Sometimes I pretended to take it." Richard examined the bottle. There was no label, just a yellowish-green liquid that smelled like medicinal herbs. "Emily, you were very smart to save this. Starting today, you won't have to take anything you don't want to, I promise." That afternoon, while Dorothy was at the pharmacy, Richard took all the samples to another lab requesting an urgent analysis. The phone rang and Richard saw on the screen that it was Jennifer. "Hi Richard, how is Emily? Dorothy told me she was sick yesterday." "She's better today," Richard lied, testing her again. "That's good. But you know, I've been thinking, maybe Emily needs a different environment for a while. more peaceful, without the pressure of you having to work so much. There it was, Jennifer starting to build the argument to ask for custody. What do you mean, Jennifer? She could stay with me for a few days. I have more free time, and she needs constant attention that you can't give. Emily is fine here with me, Jennifer. Thank you for the offer. Richard, don't be proud. The girl is clearly going through problems. Yesterday she vomited, she's thin, pale. Anyone could see she needs special care. Anyone like who? Asked Richard, sensing that Jennifer was laying the groundwork for something. Well, if necessary, I could seek professional guidance about the situation. It was a veiled threat. Jennifer was suggesting she might contact social workers or lawyers if Richard didn't cooperate voluntarily. Jennifer, I'll be direct. I'm not giving my daughter to anyone. She stays with me. Richard, you're being selfish. Think about what's best for Emily, not for you. The call ended tensely, leaving Richard certain that he needed to act quickly. Jennifer was accelerating the plan. That night, after Dorothy left, Richard sat down with Emily for dinner. He had prepared a simple dish of rice, beans, and grilled chicken. The girl ate with an appetite for the first time in weeks. "Dad, my stomach doesn't hurt today," said Emily, smiling. "That's good, honey. How do you feel?" "Less tired, and I didn't have that bad taste in my mouth that I always get after taking the vitamins." Richard made connections in his mind. All of Emily's symptoms coincided with the days she consumed Dorothy's preparations. At 10 o'clock at night, Richard's phone rang. It was Dorothy. "Mr. Richard, sorry to call late, but I'm worried about Emily. Shouldn't she at least take the basic vitamins today?" "No, Dorothy. As we discussed, we'll wait for the pediatrician. It's just, she could have a relapse if she goes too long without the proper nutrients." Dorothy's insistence confirmed Richard's suspicions. She was desperate to keep medicating Emily. "Good night, Dorothy. We'll see you tomorrow." Richard spent the night wide awake, planning the next steps. He needed to protect Emily, but also gather enough evidence to expose the whole conspiracy. The next morning, Richard was having coffee when Jennifer showed up unannounced. "Jennifer, what a surprise. You're early today." "I came to see how Emily spent the night. Dorothy told me she had diarrhea yesterday." Richard noticed how Jennifer knew details that Dorothy could only have shared over the phone or by message. The two were definitely in constant communication. "She's much better today, thank you." "May I see her?" "She's still asleep. It was finally a quiet night." Jennifer seemed irritated by the response. "Richard, I need to be honest with you. I'm concerned about your ability to take care of Emily alone." "What do you mean?" "You work 12 hours a day. The girl is always sick, pale, sad. This isn't a healthy environment for a child." "Jennifer, Emily is my daughter. I will take care of her." "And if you can't? What if she needs care you can't provide?" Richard understood that Jennifer was testing the waters for a potential legal battle. "Jennifer, what are you really saying?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time to consider what's best for Emily, not for your male ego." The accusation hit Richard like a punch. Jennifer was questioning his masculinity and his ability as a father, using arguments she knew would hurt. "My ego has nothing to do with this. I'm her father, and I will continue to be." "We'll see," said Jennifer, leaving the apartment abruptly. Richard stood still in the living room, processing the implied threat. Jennifer had left with an air of someone holding cards up her sleeve. Dorothy arrived half an hour later, and Richard noticed she seemed agitated, checking her phone constantly. "Dorothy, is everything all right? You seem worried." "It's just my mother who's sick back in Louisiana. I might need to travel for a few days." Richard doubted it was true, but pretended to believe it. "Of course, family comes first. Let me know if you need to be away." Dorothy's phone rang and she stepped away to answer. Richard managed to hear a few words. "He's getting suspicious. Faster. We can't wait." The call lasted just a few minutes, but when Dorothy returned, her posture had completely changed. She seemed determined, almost urgent. "Mr. Richard, I think Emily needs a doctor's appointment today." "Why?" "She's much better." This improvement could be misleading. Children sometimes get better before getting much worse. I've seen it many times. Richard realized Dorothy was trying to create a sense of medical urgency. If she could take Emily to the hospital during a crisis, it could strengthen the argument that the girl needed special care. "I'll watch her during the day. If she gets worse, we'll take her to the doctor," said Richard. "But Mr. Richard..." "Dorothy, I decide about my daughter's health." The woman fell silent, but Richard saw genuine fury in her eyes for the first time. During lunch, Richard personally prepared Emily's food. The girl ate normally and spent the afternoon playing, showing more energy than she had in weeks. "Dad, I feel much better today," said Emily while they colored a drawing together. "That's good, sweetie. What do you think made you sick before?" Emily thought for a moment. "I think it was Aunt Dorothy's vitamins. I always felt strange after taking them." "Strange how?" "With my stomach churning, a little dizzy, and sometimes I had nightmares about Mommy." Richard swallowed hard. "What kind of nightmares?" "Mommy appeared angry with me, saying I was a bad girl and that's why she left." Richard had to control himself to keep from crying. Dorothy had created a psychological association between the vitamins and traumatic nightmares. Emily was being tortured physically and psychologically. "Emily, your mother would never be angry with you. She loved you more than anything in the world." "I know, Dad. But when I take the vitamins, the dreams become very real." Richard embraced his daughter, silently promising he would do anything to protect her. That afternoon, while Dorothy was at the supermarket, Richard checked the hidden camera recordings. What he saw left him stunned. Dorothy had prepared not one, but 3 different vitamins for Emily. One she mixed in the juice in the morning, another in the water Emily drank during the day, and a third that she added to any liquid food the girl consumed. But what shocked Richard the most was seeing Dorothy pouring a 4th substance from a syringe directly into the solid food, when she thought no one was watching. It was systematic, calculated, and cruel. Richard immediately copied the videos to his computer and emailed them to himself as a backup. He had visual proof of what Dorothy was doing. The phone rang. It was Emily's pediatrician, Dr. Bennett. "Richard, I received some test results I ordered at Emily's last appointment. I'd like you to come here with her today." "Is there a problem, doctor? I'd rather talk in person. Can you come now?" Richard hung up with his heart racing. The pediatrician rarely asked for urgent appointments. When he told Dorothy he would take Emily to the doctor, her reaction was strange. Instead of seeming worried, she seemed almost relieved. "That's great, Mr. Richard. I think the doctor will confirm that she needs special care." The phrase sounded as if Dorothy knew exactly what the doctor was going to say. At the office, Dr. Bennett explained that Emily's blood tests showed paradoxical nutritional deficiencies. "Richard, it's strange. Emily has an iron deficiency but also signs of iron overload, as if she's taking inadequate supplements. How is that possible? When iron is ingested in forms that the body cannot properly absorb, it can cause both deficiency and overload. It's typical of inadequate or purposeful supplementation." Richard showed the soup analysis results to the pediatrician. Dr. Bennett was visibly alarmed. "Richard, this is a deliberate attempt to cause illness in a child. You need to contact the authorities." "Doctor, the person who did this has an accomplice in the family. I need to gather more evidence before acting." "I understand your caution, but Emily cannot be exposed to this for one more day." Richard agreed and explained that he had kept Emily away from anything Dorothy prepared. Back home, Richard found Dorothy agitated, talking on the phone. "No, I can't wait any longer. He's controlling everything she eats." Dorothy hung up quickly when she saw Richard. "Everything all right, Dorothy?" "Of course, Mr. Richard. How was the doctor?" "Everything's normal. Dr. Bennett said Emily is recovering well." Richard saw disappointment flash across Dorothy's face. "Oh, that's good," she said, unable to completely hide her displeasure. That afternoon, Jennifer showed up again, this time accompanied by a woman Richard didn't know. "Richard, this is Dr. Patricia Foster, a child psychologist. I asked her to take a look at Emily." "Why?" asked Richard, immediately suspicious. "Because I'm worried about my niece's emotional development. She lost her mother. She's always sick, living with a father who works too much." The psychologist smiled professionally. "Mr. Thompson, it would just be an informal chat to assess how Emily is processing her grief." Richard realized this was not a casual visit. Jennifer had brought a professional to document possible problems in Emily's upbringing. Of course, but I would like to participate in the conversation. Actually, it's better if it's just me and Emily first. Children open up more when they're alone with the professional, said Dr. Patricia. No, I prefer to be there. Emily is still too young to talk to strangers by herself. Richard saw Jennifer and the psychologist exchange a look of disapproval. Richard, you're being overprotective. This might be harming Emily, said Jennifer. I'm her father, Jennifer. I have the right to be present. The conversation with the psychologist took place in the living room, with Richard present. Dr. Patricia asked questions about how Emily felt, about nightmares, about her relationship with her father. Emily, do you feel like your father has enough time for you? Asked the psychologist. Before he didn't have much, but now he said he's going to work less, Emily answered honestly. And how do you feel when you're alone with the nanny? Richard watched Emily's reaction closely. The little girl glanced quickly at Dorothy, who was in the kitchen but could hear the conversation. Aunt Dorothy is nice, said Emily, but her voice sounded rehearsed. Can you tell me anything you don't like here at home? Emily hesitated again, looking at Richard. You can speak freely, sweetie, encouraged Richard. Sometimes I don't like the vitamins I have to take. They taste bad and make me feel sick. The psychologist wrote something down. What vitamins are those? Some yellow drops and some powders that Aunt Dorothy mixes into my food, Emily replied innocently. Richard saw how Dorothy moved about nervously in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, but clearly listening to every word. Mr. Thompson, were these vitamins prescribed by a doctor? Asked Dr. Patricia. No, they are preparations the nanny makes, claiming they are natural and nutritious. The psychologist made more notes. And you authorize this? Not anymore. Just today I prohibited any medication without a doctor's guidance. I see. And Emily, how do you feel when you don't take these vitamins? Better. Today I played all day and didn't get tired, Emily replied happily. Richard saw how Jennifer's expression changed. The psychologist was documenting evidence contrary to what she expected. After the two of them left, Dorothy seemed extremely agitated. Mr. Thompson, I think Emily should at least take the basic vitamins tonight. She could have a relapse. Dorothy, I already said no. But Mr. Thompson, I have experience with children. I know she can get worse just like that. The insistence was becoming almost aggressive. Dorothy, I'll be clear. My daughter will not take anything else you prepare. Period. Richard saw Dorothy's hands tremble with anger. For a moment, the mask of the caring nanny fell away completely. You will regret it when she gets worse, she said, before realizing what she had said. What do you mean I'll regret it? Dorothy tried to recover. I mean, you'll be worried if she gets sick again. But Richard had caught the implied threat. Dorothy was suggesting that Emily would get sick if she didn't take the substances she prepared. That night, Richard installed 2 more cameras, one in the refrigerator and one in Emily's room. If Dorothy tried to do anything during the night, he would have evidence. In the early morning, around 3 o'clock, Richard was awakened by a noise in the kitchen. Discreetly, he checked the cameras through the app on his phone. Dorothy was there, dressed in a robe, fiddling with bottles and preparing something. Richard saw her mix several liquids into a small glass, taste the mixture, and make adjustments. Then she quietly went upstairs. Richard followed her through the hallways on the camera until he saw her stop at the door to Emily's room. Dorothy entered the room and approached the bed where Emily was sleeping. Richard saw through the bedroom camera how she tried to gently wake the girl. Emily, sweetie, Auntie needs you to take a little medicine so you don't get sick. Richard jumped out of bed and ran to his daughter's room. Dorothy was startled when he appeared at the door. What are you doing here? Asked Richard, seeing the glass in Dorothy's hand. Emily wasn't feeling well, whimpering. I brought her a calming tea, lied Dorothy. Richard looked at Emily, who had clearly been fast asleep just seconds before. Dorothy, I want you to leave my house right now. Mr. Thompson, I was only trying to help. Now, get your things and go. Dorothy left the glass on the bedside table and quickly exited. Richard picked up the glass and smelled it. The liquid had a strong chemical odor, Nothing like tea. Richard stored the liquid in a vial and the next day took it for analysis. Dr. Roberts called a few hours later. "Richard, what you brought me has extremely high concentrations of melatonin and valerian, enough to render a child unconscious for hours." Unconscious? Yes. And if administered regularly, it can cause chemical dependency and neurological development problems. Richard understood the full gravity of the situation. Dorothy wasn't just making Emily sick, she was trying to sedate her to make it easier to administer the other substances. But when Richard arrived home, he found Jennifer at the door with two men in suits. "Richard, these are Dr. Harris and Dr. Wilson from Child Protective Services. I came here because I'm concerned about Emily's condition." Richard felt the world spin. Jennifer had officially activated the child protection system. "I don't understand, Jennifer. Emily is fine." "Richard, Dorothy told me you fired her abruptly last night for no apparent reason, and Emily is losing weight, always sick, and we need to assess the situation." Dr. Harris, a bald man of about 50, formally introduced himself. "Mr. Thompson, we received an anonymous complaint about possible neglect in the care of a minor. We need to speak with the child." "Neglect? I take very good care of my daughter." "Of course, sir, it's just a standard procedure. May we come in?" Richard had no choice. The three entered the apartment, and Dr. Wilson, the younger one, began asking questions about Emily's routine. "Where is the child now?" asked Dr. Harris. "In her room, resting." "Does she rest a lot during the day?" Richard saw the trap. If he said yes, it would seem Emily was sick. If he said no, it would contradict what they found. "She is recovering from a period of poor nutrition," Richard said carefully. Jennifer interjected, "Richard, be honest. Emily has been constantly ill. You fired the nanny who cared for her. You work more than 10 hours a day." "Jennifer, I fired the nanny because I discovered she was medicating Emily without medical authorization." "What medication?" asked Dr. Harris. Richard showed the vials he had collected and explained about the lab analyses. The social workers asked to see the results. "Mr. Thompson, these are serious accusations. Do you have concrete proof?" asked Dr. Wilson. Richard showed the lab reports and the recordings he had made. The two men examined everything carefully. "This is very serious," said Dr. Harris. "Where is this nanny now?" "I fired her last night when I caught her trying to give more medication to Emily in the middle of the night." Jennifer seemed bothered. "Richard, you're making up stories to justify your paranoid behavior." "Paranoid? Jennifer, I have proof." "Proof that you could have fabricated. Everyone knows you've been stressed, overworking, neglecting Emily." Dr. Harris raised his hand. "Mrs. Jennifer, let's keep the focus on the investigation. Mr. Thompson, may we speak with Emily?" Richard called for his daughter, who came downstairs still sleepy. The social workers spoke with her kindly, asking about her routine, how she felt, whether her father took good care of her. "My father is the best father in the world," said Emily firmly, "and I feel much better since I stopped taking those bad vitamins." "What vitamins were those?" asked Dr. Wilson. "Some that Aunt Dorothy used to make. They tasted awful and made my stomach hurt." "And did your father know about these vitamins?" "He didn't, because Aunt Dorothy said it was our secret. But yesterday I told him everything." Richard saw how Jennifer paled as Emily spoke. "Emily, do you like living with your father?" asked Dr. Harris. "I love living with him. Before he used to work a lot, but now he's promised to spend more time with me." After talking for another hour, the social workers left, promising to investigate the allegations against Dorothy and return in a few days. Jennifer was getting ready to leave when Richard confronted her. "Jennifer, why did you do this?" "Do what? Worry about my niece?" "You knew what Dorothy was doing, didn't you?" "Richard, you're delusional. Dorothy is a competent professional that you fired because you're paranoid." "Jennifer, I have recordings of you two talking about money and about making Emily sick." Richard lied about having recordings of their conversation, but he wanted to see Jennifer's reaction. His sister-in-law visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have recordings of you planning to use Emily's symptoms to question my ability as a father, and I know about Catherine's life insurance." Jennifer was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, colder. "Richard, you never deserved Catherine. She was depressed because you only thought about work, and now you're doing the same thing with Emily." "Jennifer, what happened to Catherine was an accident, and I am changing my relationship with Emily." "Changing now that you've discovered the plan, right?" said Jennifer, not realizing she had confessed. Richard stood still, processing that Jennifer had just admitted there was a plan. "What plan, Jennifer?" Jennifer realized what she had said and tried to recover. "I didn't mean plan. I meant your situation." "Jennifer, sit here. Let's talk like adults." Richard pointed to the living room sofa. Jennifer sat down reluctantly. "Jennifer, I know you love Emily. I know you loved Catherine, but what is happening here is harming an innocent child." "You're the one harming her. You always worked too much, you never paid attention to Catherine. Now you're repeating the same mistakes with Emily." "You're right about the past. I worked too much. I didn't give Catherine the attention she deserved. But that doesn't justify poisoning my daughter." "No one is poisoning anyone," exploded Jennifer. "Dorothy was trying to strengthen Emily with natural vitamins." "Jennifer, I have lab analyses. The substances Dorothy was giving Emily were toxic to children." Richard showed the medical reports to Jennifer. As she read, her expression changed from defensive to shocked. This can't be right," murmured Jennifer. "It's true, Jennifer. Dorothy was systematically poisoning Emily, and you were paying for it to happen." Jennifer began to cry. "Richard, I swear I didn't know it was like this. Dorothy said they were just natural supplements to make Emily weaker, so you would realize you needed help." "Weaker? Jennifer, you hired someone to weaken my daughter? It wasn't like that. I believed that if Emily got a little sick, you would finally realize you can't take care of her alone, that she needs a maternal figure. And that maternal figure would be you?" Jennifer nodded through tears. "Catherine always said that if anything happened to her, I should take care of Emily. You two were my entire family." Richard began to understand the emotional dimension behind the conspiracy. Jennifer wasn't just being greedy, she was genuinely convinced she was saving Emily. "Jennifer, you know there's a legal way to show concern for a child's well-being. You didn't have to poison her." "I didn't know it was poison. Dorothy said they were supplements that would cause mild symptoms like loss of appetite and tiredness, so you would realize you need help." Richard shook his head. "Jennifer, even if they were just mild supplements, you were willing to make an 8-year-old child feel sick to get what you wanted." "I wanted to protect Emily, like Catherine asked me to." "Catherine would never ask you to hurt our daughter." Jennifer stopped crying and looked directly at Richard. "Catherine told me the week before the accident that she was worried about leaving Emily alone with you if something happened." Richard felt as if he had been punched. "What do you mean?" "She said you were so addicted to work that you wouldn't even notice if Emily was suffering, that I should make sure she grew up with a mother's love, not just a father's money." Jennifer's words hurt because they contained a truth Richard had been trying to avoid. He really had been an absent father, and Catherine really had expressed concerns about it. "Jennifer, even if Catherine had those concerns, she would never approve of hurting Emily to solve the problem." "I know that now," Jennifer burst out. "Dorothy convinced me it would just be some mild nausea, that you would realize you need help and would voluntarily let Emily spend more time with me." "And the insurance money? How does that fit into the story?" Jennifer was silent for a long moment. "I'm in debt, Richard. A lot of debt. I lost my job 3 months ago and haven't been able to find another. I thought that if I took care of Emily, I could manage her insurance money to pay my bills and still give her a good life." "Jennifer, you're talking about using the money Catherine left for our daughter to pay your personal debts. It's not like that. I would take good care of Emily. She would have everything she needs, while you use her money to solve your financial problems." Richard could see Jennifer was beginning to understand the moral gravity of what she had planned. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard, I lost my way. After Catherine passed away, I felt responsible for Emily. And when the financial troubles started, Dorothy appeared with a solution that seemed like it could help all of us. How did you meet her? She approached me 3 months ago. She said she had experience with children and that she noticed Emily looked sad when you were at the mall. She offered to help. Richard immediately became suspicious. She approached you. How did she know who you were? Jennifer hesitated. She said she knew Catherine from somewhere. From where? She couldn't really explain. She said they were old acquaintances. Richard felt there was another layer to this story that he didn't know yet. The next day, Richard hired a private detective named Jack Peterson, recommended by his lawyer. Jack was a 50-year-old former police detective who now investigated family and business cases. Mr. Thompson, I will investigate both Dorothy Williams and your sister-in-law Jennifer. I need you to give me all the details you can about how they met and when they started working together. Richard told the whole story, handed over copies of the lab reports and the recordings he had made. Jack took detailed notes. Dorothy said she knew your wife Catherine from somewhere. Asked Jack. According to Jennifer, yes. But Catherine never mentioned knowing anyone by that name. I'll look into this. Sometimes people invent connections to seem more trustworthy. Jack left promising to return with information in 2 days. Meanwhile, Richard decided to keep Emily at home, without a nanny, working from home. In just 3 days, the girl had regained color in her face, was eating normally, and showing an energy Richard hadn't seen in months. Dad, why doesn't Aunt Dorothy come anymore? Asked Emily during lunch. She went to take care of her family in Louisiana, said Richard. Do you miss her? Emily thought for a moment. A little bit. She used to do fun games, but I like it better when it's just you and me. And why do you think you like it better that way? Because I don't have to take bad medicine, and you're not worried about me all the time. Richard realized that Dorothy had created an environment of constant anxiety in the house, where everyone was always worried about Emily's health. Honey, do you remember having taken anything at school or at a friend's house that made you sick? No, Dad. I only felt sick right here at home. The answer confirmed that the problem was specifically with the substances Dorothy had been giving her. 2 days later, Jack returned with information that left Richard stunned. Richard, Dorothy Williams doesn't exist. Her real name is Dorothy Marie Williams, and she has a criminal record. Criminal how? She's been sued twice for giving harmful substances to children under her care. In both cases, the families discovered she was medicating the children to create symptoms that would justify special care. How did she pass the background check? She uses fake documents for domestic work. The ID she showed you belongs to a woman who died 5 years ago in Louisiana. Richard felt nauseous. He had let a convicted criminal take care of his daughter for 2 months. And Jennifer? Did she know about this? That's where it gets more complicated. Investigating your sister-in-law's financial history, I found out she has debts of almost $80,000, credit cards, loans, financing. That's why she needed the insurance money. Exactly. But here's the interesting part. Dorothy sought out Jennifer, not the other way around. She investigated your family after Catherine's death, identified Jennifer as a possible accomplice, and approached her with the plan. Richard sat down heavily in the chair. Was Jennifer manipulated too? Yes and no. Dorothy offered a solution to Jennifer's financial problems, but Jennifer knowingly agreed to participate in a plan to make a child sick. Even if she didn't know the medical severity, she knew it was wrong. And now? Now you have choices. You can press criminal charges against both, or try to handle it more personally. But Richard, this woman you know as Dorothy, has done this to other families. If you don't act, she'll look for other victims. Richard spent the whole afternoon thinking about his options. On one hand, he wanted to protect other families from Dorothy's actions. On the other hand, he knew a criminal lawsuit would be traumatic for Emily and would definitely destroy his relationship with Jennifer. That night, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Dorothy. Mr. Richard, can we talk? I know you're angry with me, but I can explain everything. Dorothy, we have nothing to talk about. I know exactly what you did. Please, Mr. Richard, 5 minutes. Can I come over? Richard hesitated. Maybe it was an opportunity to record a full confession. All right, but Emily isn't here. Richard lied. 30 minutes later, Dorothy was at the apartment door. She looked tired, nervous, very different from the confident woman he had met months ago. Richard received her in the living room, with his phone recorder already on. "Dorothy, what do you want to talk about?" "Mr. Richard, I know you've discovered some things and I know you're angry, but I need you to understand my situation." "What situation?" Dorothy took a deep breath. "My son is sick, very sick. He needs surgery that costs over $50,000. When I heard your story about Jennifer having money problems, I thought we could help each other." "Help by poisoning my daughter?" "It wasn't poison," protested Dorothy. "They were substances that would make her a little weak, just so you'd realize you needed help. Nothing that would cause permanent harm." "Dorothy, do you have medical training to know what harm those substances could cause?" She remained silent. "Dorothy, my daughter could have had serious heart, neurological or digestive problems. You were playing with a child's life. I know I was wrong, but my son, he'll die if he doesn't have the surgery." Richard felt a pang of compassion, but remembered Emily vomiting and having nightmares. "Dorothy, I understand your desperation as a mother, but that doesn't justify what you did. What are you going to do with me?" Richard looked at this woman who had cared for his daughter for 2 months, who had gained Emily's trust, who had abused that trust in the worst possible way. "Dorothy, you're going to find Jennifer now and you'll both confess everything to the authorities, voluntarily. If you do that, I won't press criminal charges against you." "And my son?" "I'll think of some way to help with his treatment, but far from my family." Dorothy cried and agreed to the proposal. "Mr. Richard, I'm so sorry. I never really wanted to hurt Emily." "But you did hurt her, Dorothy. It might not have been your intention, but you hurt her." After Dorothy left, Richard called Jack. "Jack, they're going to confess everything tomorrow. Can you accompany them to make sure it's done properly?" "Of course, Richard. And you made the right decision. Criminal cases take years and traumatize children." The next morning, Richard took Emily for breakfast at a bakery she loved in Santa Monica. The girl was radiant, eating a chocolate-covered sugar bread and telling stories about school. "Dad, there's a party at school tomorrow. Can you come?" "Of course I can. I'll go to the office early just to be there." "Really? You could never come to the parties before." Richard realized how much of Emily's childhood he had missed by always being busy with work. "Sweetheart, I'm going to tell you something. I've decided I'm going to work less and spend more time with you. Forever. Like you promised when Mommy passed away." The question stung, because Richard had indeed made similar promises after losing Catherine, but had returned to his exhausting work routine a few weeks later. "This time is different, Emily. This time it's a promise I'll keep because I understood something important." "What?" "That there's no point in working to give you a good life if I'm not here to live that life with you." Emily smiled and hugged Richard right there in the bakery. When they returned home, Jack was waiting with news. Richard, Dorothy and Jennifer confessed everything. Dorothy will be prosecuted for the previous crimes we discovered, but not for this case, since you chose not to press charges. Jennifer agreed to undergo psychological counseling and signed an agreement committing not to seek custody of Emily. And now? Now you rebuild your life with your daughter. That afternoon, Richard had a long conversation with Emily about what had happened, adapting the explanation for her age. "Sweetheart, Dorothy was giving you medicine that wasn't good for you. That's why you felt sick. Did she do it on purpose?" Richard hesitated about how much truth to share. She thought she was helping, but she was wrong, and now she understands she made a mistake. "What about Aunt Jennifer?" "Aunt Jennifer also got confused about what was the best way to take care of you, but she truly loves you. Can I see her again?" "Yes, you can, sweetheart, but it will be different now. She'll come visit, play with you, but you'll always live here with me." Emily seemed relieved by the clarity of the situation. 2 weeks later, Richard had completely restructured his routine. He delegated several responsibilities to other partners at the construction company, hired 2 managers to handle daily operations, and established a firm rule of not working after 5 in the evening or on weekends. The change wasn't easy professionally, but Richard realized he could be both a good businessman and a present father. Emily was seeing a child psychologist recommended by Dr. Bennett to help process both the grief for her mother and the trauma of having been medicated without her knowledge. "How do you feel about what happened with Dorothy and Jennifer?" asked the psychologist during a session. "Sad. I liked them. But now I understand that sometimes people we like do wrong things. And how do you feel about your father discovering it and protecting you?" "Happy. And proud. My dad is very smart." Richard, who was attending the session, felt his chest tighten with emotion. 1 month after the incident, Jennifer asked to speak with Richard in person. They met at a cafe in Beverly Hills, neutral territory. "Richard, I want to apologize to you. Truly. Jennifer, you participated in a plan to poison my daughter. I know, I can't undo that. But I want you to know that I never intended to physically hurt Emily. I thought it would just be a few days of weakness. Jennifer, intention doesn't change the outcome. Emily was poisoned for 2 months. I know, and I'll carry this guilt for the rest of my life." Richard studied his sister-in-law's face. Jennifer seemed genuinely remorseful, thinner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. "How are your debts?" "I got a loan with bad terms to avoid losing the apartment. It'll take me about 5 years to pay everything off, working 2 jobs. And Dorothy disappeared. I think she left Los Angeles after she confessed. She only left a note saying she was going to take care of her sick son." Richard remained silent, thinking. "Jennifer, I want you to stay in touch with Emily. She needs a female figure from the family, especially someone who knew Catherine." Jennifer looked surprised. "After everything I did, you made a serious mistake, but you did it out of confused love, not pure malice. Emily lost her mother, she can't lose you too." "And how would that work?" "Supervised visits. You come on the weekend, play with her, tell stories about Catherine, but always in my presence, at least for now." Jennifer began to cry. "Richard, you are more generous than I deserve." "It's not generosity, Jennifer. It's pragmatism. Emily needs to know stories about her mother that only you know. She needs to have a connection with her mother's family, but within safe boundaries." 3 months later, life had found a new rhythm. Richard worked from 8 to noon, picked up Emily from school every day, and they spent afternoons together. Evenings were dedicated to conversations, playtime, and cartoons. Emily was being seen monthly by Dr. Bennett, who confirmed a complete recovery from the effects of the substances she had ingested. Jennifer visited on Sundays, always bringing simple gifts and stories about Catherine. At first, the visits were tense, but they gradually became more natural. "Aunt Jennifer, tell that story again about when you and Mommy got lost at the mall," Emily would ask during one of these visits. Richard listened to the stories with interest, discovering aspects of Catherine he hadn't known. He realized there was so much about his wife he didn't know, because he had always been too busy to really talk to her. During one of these afternoons, Emily asked a question that took Richard by surprise. "Dad, do you still love Mom?" "Of course I do, sweetheart. I always will." "And are you sad because she died?" Richard took a deep breath. "I am sad, yes, but I'm also happy to have you, who are a little piece of her that stayed with me. I get sad sometimes too, but I don't have bad nightmares anymore." Richard realized Emily was processing her grief in a healthier way, now that she wasn't being medicated with substances that affected her sleep and dreams. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 6 months after the incident with Dorothy, Richard received an unexpected call from Jack. Richard remembered Dorothy. She was arrested in Denver trying to pull the same scam on another family. The same scam? Identical. She infiltrated as a nanny, started medicating a child to create symptoms, and tried to convince a relative to seek custody by claiming parental neglect. Richard felt a strange relief, knowing they had prevented Dorothy from continuing to harm other children. And her sick son. That was another lie, Richard. Dorothy doesn't have children. She used that story to gain sympathy from her victims. Richard shook his head, impressed by the level of Dorothy's manipulation. "Richard, there's one more thing. During the investigation, The police discovered Dorothy had researched your family for months before approaching Jennifer. She knew about the life insurance, about Jennifer's debts, about your work schedule, everything. How did she get that information? Social media, public records, direct observation. She's a professional scammer, not a desperate amateur. Richard hung up the phone thinking about how naive he had been. Dorothy had studied his family like a predator studies its prey. But something still bothered him. If Dorothy was so professional, why had she made obvious mistakes that allowed her discovery? Why had she left the notebook with incriminating notes? Why had she insisted so much on the vitamins when he started resisting? Richard called Jack with these questions. Jack, one thing bothers me. If Dorothy was so experienced, why was she so careless? Good question, Richard. Investigating the previous cases, I noticed a pattern. Dorothy always became reckless when the victims started resisting. It's like she couldn't accept losing control of the situation. Do you think she would have done something more drastic if I hadn't acted? Based on the other cases, yes. When families started suspecting, she always escalated the dosages to create more serious medical crises that forced hospitalizations. Richard felt a chill down his spine, imagining what could have happened to Emily. Richard, you saved your daughter not just from poisoning, but from something potentially much worse. That night, Richard had a deep conversation with Emily about courage and protection. Dad, how did you know something was wrong? Asked Emily. Because you were suffering, sweetheart. And a father always notices when his child isn't well. But Aunt Dorothy seemed so nice. Sometimes people who seem nice do bad things, Emily. That's why it's important to always tell me if anything makes you uncomfortable. Can I tell you anything? Anything. It doesn't matter if someone else told you not to tell. You can always trust me. 1 year after the incident, Richard was at Emily's 9th birthday party. The girl was running through the backyard with her school friends, laughing loudly and showing the vibrant energy of a healthy child. Jennifer was there too, helping organize the sweets. The relationship between them had slowly rebuilt itself, based on honesty and clear boundaries. Richard, thank you for giving me a second chance, said Jennifer as they cut the cake. Thank you for accepting the conditions and seeking psychological help. Therapy helped me understand that I was projecting my pain over losing Catherine onto Emily. I wanted to save her from a situation that didn't even really exist. And how do you feel now? Guilty still, but also grateful that Richard was wiser than me and prevented a greater tragedy. During the party, Richard watched Emily interact with her friends. She was confident, cheerful, with no signs of the trauma she had experienced. Mr. Thompson, may I speak with you for a moment? It was the mother of one of Emily's classmates. Of course. Emily told my daughter a story about a nanny who gave her bad medicine. Is it true? Richard tensed up. Why do you ask? Because my housekeeper told me that a woman has been asking about our family in the building where I live. The description matches the one Emily gave of her nanny. Richard felt his blood run cold. Dorothy could be trying to pull the same scam on other families in Emily's social circle. What kind of questions? About schedules, whether I work a lot, if I have help with the children? Richard took Jack's card and gave it to the woman. Call this detective and tell him the whole story, and warn the other mothers at the school. 2 weeks later, Jack confirmed that Dorothy was indeed trying to infiltrate other families in Emily's circle. The police were alerted and managed to arrest her before she could get employed again. For Richard, you saved at least 3 families from going through what you went through, said Jack. Richard felt relieved knowing they had prevented Dorothy from harming other children, but the experience had changed Richard deeply. He realized that his emotional absence had left Emily vulnerable to outside manipulation. A nanny had managed to gain more influence over his daughter in 2 months than he had exercised as a present father in recent years. Richard decided to make structural changes in his life. He sold 40% of his stake in the company to his partners, ensuring a passive income that would allow him to work less. He invested in family therapy for himself and Emily, and he established weekly traditions that could not be interrupted by work. Every Tuesday, father and daughter had movie night with popcorn and ice cream. On Saturdays, they visited Catherine's grave together, bringing flowers and talking about happy memories. Sundays were for adventures, the beach, parks, museums, or simply staying home doing nothing productive. Emily thrived in this new environment. Her grades at school improved, she made new friends, and she started dance classes, which Catherine had always wanted her to do. "Dad, I think Mommy would be happy seeing us like this," said Emily during a visit to the cemetery. "Why do you think that?" "Because you're smiling for real now. Before you only smiled with your mouth, not with your eyes." Richard realized his daughter's precocious wisdom. Children see through the masks that adults think they're wearing well. "You're right, sweetheart. I am truly happy now. And I'm also not afraid anymore that you'll leave like Mommy did." "Why did you have that fear?" "Because you were always worried, always in a hurry. It seemed like you were running away from something. Now it seems like you enjoy being at home." Richard hugged Emily at the cemetery, finally understanding that he had been running from the pain of loss by burying himself in work, and that had almost cost him his daughter. 6 months later, Richard was in the living room waiting for the new nanny he had hired. This time he had done a complete background check, requested references from at least 5 previous families, and established clear rules about medication and food. Mrs. Eleanor arrived promptly at 8 in the morning. A 62-year-old lady, a widow, with 30 years of experience in childcare and impeccable references. "Mr. Richard, you can rest easy. I've learned that a healthy child is one who plays, eats normal food, and has adults who pay attention to her. No strange mixtures or homemade remedies." Richard laughed. He had explained the whole situation to Mrs. Eleanor during the interview, and she had been horrified by Dorothy's story. "Mrs. Eleanor, the main rule is, if Emily needs anything beyond normal food and basic first aid, you call me immediately." "Agreed. And another thing, Mr. Richard, if I notice any change in the girl's behavior or health, even the smallest ones, I'll let you know right away." Perfect. Emily adapted quickly to Mrs. Eleanor. The new nanny had a firm but caring way about her, taught old games that Catherine used to play, and showed no interest in medicating or controlling beyond what was necessary. "Dad, Mrs. Eleanor taught me how to make fudge just like Mum used to make," Emily happily shared one afternoon. "Really? And how did it turn out?" "Just the same. She said that Mum's recipes never go out of style." Richard smiled, realizing that Mrs. Eleanor was helping Emily keep Catherine's culinary memory alive in a healthy and loving way. One day, Emily came home from school with news that surprised Richard. "Dad, my teacher wants to talk to you." "Why? Did something happen?" "I think it's something good. She said I've been very different, happier and more talkative." At the meeting with the teacher, Richard heard things that moved him. "Mr. Thompson, Emily is unrecognizable. In the last few months, she was always tired, distracted, sometimes sleeping during class. Now she's participating, playing normally, making new friends. We went through a difficult time at home, but we've resolved it. I'm very happy. Emily is a special girl, smart and sensitive. It's good to see her flourishing." Richard left the school with a sense of mission accomplished. He had protected his daughter not only from ill-intentioned people, but also from his own shortcomings as a father. That night, while helping Emily with her homework, she made an observation that deeply marked him. "Dad, before I thought you didn't like me very much." Richard stopped reviewing the math exercises. "What do you mean, honey?" "You were always far away. You only came to say goodnight when I was almost asleep. I thought it was because I reminded you of Mom and that made you sad." Richard felt tears burning his eyes. "Honey, I've always loved you more than anything. I worked so much because I thought it was the way to take care of you. I know that now, but before I didn't know." "And how do you know now?" "Because you're happy when you're with me. Before you seemed to be fulfilling an obligation." Emily's sincerity hit Richard like a revelation. He had been physically present but emotionally absent, treating fatherhood as just another responsibility to be efficiently fulfilled. "Emily, do you forgive me for taking so long to learn how to be a real father?" "Dad, you've always been a real father. You were just confused for a while." Emily's emotional maturity impressed Richard. At 9 years old, she demonstrated an understanding of relationships that many adults didn't have. A year and a half after the incident with Dorothy, Richard was organizing a Children's Day party at home. I had invited several families from Emily's school, wanting to create a healthy social environment for her. During the party, Richard observed Emily playing with her friends and felt a deep gratitude for having protected her in time. The girl was strong, healthy, confident, and happy. Jennifer arrived in the middle of the afternoon with a special gift, a photo album of Catherine that she had organized especially for Emily. "Aunt Jennifer made this for me," Emily proudly showed her friends. "These are pictures of my mom when she was a child, just like me." Richard flipped through the album and was moved seeing Catherine at various stages of her life, many photos he didn't know. "Jennifer, this is beautiful. Thank you." "It's the least I can do, Richard. Catherine would be proud to see you two like this." During the party, a mother approached Richard with a comment that surprised him. "Mr. Thompson, Emily always talks about how present and caring you are. My husband could learn a few things from you." "How so?" "He travels a lot for work, just like you used to, and our son is missing him. Emily said you changed your whole life to spend more time with her." Richard realized his experience could help other families avoid the mistakes he had made. "It's true. I learned that professional success is worthless if you lose your family in the process. How did you manage to balance it?" "By delegating, prioritizing, and understanding that my daughter needs me present, not just my money." The conversation continued, and Richard ended up sharing his experience with several parents at the party. He realized that many families faced the same dilemma between career and present fatherhood. 2 weeks later, Richard received an unexpected invitation. A group of parents from the school had created a support group to discuss active fatherhood, and they wanted him to participate as an example of successful transformation. "Mr. Thompson, your story inspired many of us to rethink our priorities," said one of the organizers during the first meeting. Richard shared his experience, talked about the signs he had ignored, about the importance of being emotionally present, and about how he almost lost Emily by being absent. "What struck me the most," Richard told the group, "was realizing that my daughter was being manipulated by outsiders because I hadn't created a strong enough emotional connection with her. If I had been a present father from the start, Dorothy would never have managed to gain so much influence over Emily." The group met every 2 weeks, and Richard became a sort of mentor for fathers who were struggling to balance career and family. During one of these meetings, a father recounted a situation that put Richard on alert. "My housekeeper has been suggesting that my son needs special vitamins because he's very restless at school." Richard interrupted immediately. "What kind of vitamins?" "She says she knows of natural products that calm hyperactive children." "What's her name?" "Virginia. Virginia Williams." Richard felt a chill. Williams was the fake last name Dorothy used. "Can you describe her for me?" The description matched Dorothy, a woman in her 50s, graying hair, with a caring but insistent manner about medications. Richard immediately called Jack. "I think Dorothy is operating again, using a different name." "Richard, she was released 2 months ago. She only served 6 months in prison because there was no record under her real name. How is that possible? Overloaded justice system. But if it's really her, this time we can arrest her for being a repeat offender." Richard arranged a meeting between Jack and the father, who had reported the situation. Within 3 days, they confirmed it was indeed Dorothy operating under a new identity. Her arrest was carried out in a coordinated manner, preventing her from escaping again. This time, the authorities had enough evidence for a longer conviction. "Richard, Dorothy will be in prison for at least 3 years, and now she's in the system as a repeat offender," informed Jack. Richard felt relieved knowing other families would be safe for a good while. 2 years after the original incident, Richard was in his lawyer's office finalizing an important document. "Mr. Thompson, everything is ready. The educational fund for Emily has been established with all the legal protections you requested." Richard had created a trust fund that would guarantee Emily's college education, but that couldn't be accessed by third parties or used as justification for a change of custody. "Now, even if something happens to me, Emily will be protected financially and legally." The lawyer explained that he had appointed a trust management company to handle the fund, removing the temptation for family members to misuse the money. "And what about custody?" asked Richard. "In case of your incapacity, we've established that Emily would stay with your parents first, then with a couple of friends you indicated. Jennifer is specifically excluded from the legal line of succession." Richard knew it was a harsh measure, but necessary. Jennifer had shown she was capable of making decisions harmful to Emily when under financial pressure. That afternoon, Richard had a difficult conversation with Jennifer about the legal changes. "Jennifer, I need to tell you about some decisions I've made regarding Emily's protection." He explained about the trust fund and about her exclusion from the legal custody line. "Richard, I understand completely. I've proven I can't be trusted in high-pressure situations. It's not personal, Jennifer. It's institutional protection." "And can I still see Emily?" "Of course. But now there are legal safeguards, so she'll never be used as a solution for adults' financial problems." Jennifer nodded, visibly sad but understanding. "Richard, can I ask you something? Have you really forgiven me?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Jennifer, I understand you acted out of confused love for Emily, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or removing consequences. I can coexist with you cordially, but I'll never fully trust you again." "That's fair," said Jennifer. "I don't deserve your complete trust anyway." 3 years after the incident, Emily was 11 years old and had become a confident, articulate girl. Richard watched her during a school presentation where she spoke about families overcoming difficulties. "Sometimes bad things happen in families," said Emily to the audience of parents and students. "But if people truly love each other, they can solve problems by talking and being honest with one another." Richard felt proud seeing how Emily had processed the whole experience in a mature and constructive way. After the presentation, several mothers approached Richard. "Mr. Thompson, Emily spoke about how you overcame a difficult family situation. Could you share something?" Richard looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "We went through a situation where people we trusted weren't acting in Emily's best interest, and I learned that family protection starts with emotional presence, not just physical or financial." "How so?" "I was physically present, but emotionally absent. That left my daughter vulnerable to outside influences. When I became a truly present father, she became stronger and more protected." The conversation developed naturally, and Richard realized his experience was helping other families identify and solve similar problems. On the way back home, Emily made an observation that surprised Richard. "Dad, do you think Aunt Dorothy had a real family?" "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because she always seemed sad when she talked about her family, as if it were a lie." Richard was impressed with Emily's perception. "You might be right. Sometimes people who don't have true love in their lives try to get it in the wrong ways. Do you think if she had a family that truly cared about her, she wouldn't have done bad things?" Emily's question made Richard reflect on Dorothy's deeper motivations. Perhaps behind the criminal was a lonely and desperate woman. "Maybe, sweetheart, but that doesn't excuse what she did. Adults are responsible for their choices, even when they're suffering." "I understand, Dad, but I feel sad for her too." Richard hugged Emily, impressed by his daughter's ability to feel empathy even for someone who had harmed her. 4 years after the incident, Richard was at Emily's 5th grade graduation. The girl had become class president, participated in student council, and maintained excellent grades. During the graduation speech, Emily was chosen to speak on behalf of her class. "We've learned over these years that growing up means understanding that not all adults always make the right choices," she said into the microphone. "But we've also learned that when there's true love in a family, people can protect each other and help each other grow." Richard had tears in his eyes listening to his daughter speak with such maturity. "I want to thank my dad for protecting me when I needed it, and for changing his life to give me what I really needed. His presence," Emily continued. The audience applauded, and Richard felt that all the pain of recent years had been worth it to reach that moment. After the graduation, a woman approached Richard in the schoolyard. "Mr. Thompson, I'm a journalist from the Family Journal. I'd like to do a story about your experience with involved fatherhood. Emily is an inspiring example of how children respond when they have truly engaged parents." Richard hesitated. He didn't like public exposure, but he thought his story might actually help other families. "I'll think about the proposal. Can you contact me next week?" 2 months later, Richard was being interviewed for the story. He decided to tell the full story, only omitting the real names of Dorothy and Jennifer to protect their privacy. "Mr. Thompson, what stood out to you most in this experience?" "Discovering that I was so emotionally absent that a stranger gained more influence over my daughter in 2 months than I had built in years as a father." "And what has changed since then?" "Everything. My relationship with work, my presence at home, my emotional connection with Emily. I understood that being a father isn't just paying bills and scolding when necessary. It's being present for the joys, fears, discoveries, and doubts." The story was published 2 weeks later and generated a surprising response. Richard received dozens of messages from parents sharing similar experiences, asking for advice, and thanking him for his honesty. One message in particular stood out to him. It was from a father in Chicago. "Mr. Thompson, I read your story and realized my nanny is doing exactly what yours did. My daughter is always tired and the nanny keeps suggesting special vitamins. I sought medical help and discovered she was giving inappropriate substances to my daughter. Your story saved me from a similar situation. Thank you for having the courage to share." Richard showed the message to Emily. "Sweetheart, our story helped another child." "Really? That's so cool. That means something good came out of all that bad stuff that happened." "Exactly. Sometimes we go through difficulties so we can help other people later." "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Richard looked at his daughter, seeing so much of Catherine in her gestures and expressions. "I'm sure she would, my dear. Catherine would be proud to see how you've grown strong and how we've learned to be a real family." 5 years after the incident with Dorothy, Richard was in the audience watching Emily perform in a school play about family overcoming challenges. Emily played a girl who helps her father realize that work isn't more important than family. The irony didn't go unnoticed. Emily had chosen a story that echoed her own experience, turning trauma into art. After the performance, Richard went to congratulate Emily backstage. "Dad, I chose this play thinking about us," she said, still in her stage makeup. "And what did you want to show with it?" "That sometimes parents need their children to teach them too, and that real families grow together." Richard hugged Emily, realizing she had found a creative and healthy way to process her experience. During dinner at home, Emily asked a question that took Richard by surprise. "Dad, have you ever thought about getting married again?" "Why are you asking that?" "Because sometimes I see you alone and think you could be happy with someone special, but she has to like me too." Richard chuckled softly. "Honey, for now you and I are a complete family. If someone special ever comes along, you'll be the first to know." "And will I get to give my opinion?" "Absolutely. No one joins our family without Emily's approval." "Good, because now I know how to tell good people from those who pretend to be good." Richard was impressed by Emily's maturity. The experience with Dorothy had taught her to trust her instincts about people. 6 months later, Richard was at a parent meeting when he met Sarah, a Portuguese teacher from another school. She was also a widow, mother of a 10-year-old boy, and shared similar views on education and present parenting. They began talking regularly about the challenges of raising children alone and gradually developed a friendship that was turning into something deeper. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Emily, but I want to be completely honest about our history first." Richard told the whole experience with Dorothy and Jennifer, explaining how he had become more protective and cautious with new people in Emily's life. "Richard, I admire your honesty and your dedication to Emily. As a single mother, I completely understand the need to protect our children. And how did your son react when you started seeing other people?" "At first he resisted, but now he understands that he'll always be my priority and that other people can add to our family, not compete." Richard introduced Sarah to Emily in a neutral setting during a picnic in Central Park. The two connected immediately, talking about books and cartoons. "Dad, Sarah is nice. She doesn't ask weird questions or offer things I didn't ask for," Emily said afterward. Richard laughed. "And what did you think of her as a person?" I liked her. She looks at you the way you look at me when you're truly happy. 6 months later, Richard and Sarah were seriously dating. The children got along well, and they had created a healthy family dynamic where everyone respected and supported each other. During a family Sunday, Emily made a comment that touched Richard deeply. "Dad, I think I understand now what a real family is." "How so?" "Before I thought family was just people who had to take care of each other because they had no choice. Now I see that family is people who choose to take care of each other because they want to." Richard looked at Sarah, who was holding her own son's hand, and at Emily, who was playing with both of them. It had taken years, but I had finally learned that family isn't something that happens automatically. It's something you build consciously every day. "And do you feel safe in this family, daughter?" "Very safe, because I know that if something is wrong, you'll notice and protect me, and I know I can tell you anything without fear." Richard remembered how Emily had hidden the symptoms that Dorothy caused because she was taught not to bother adults. Now she had learned that open communication is the foundation of family protection. 7 years after the incident with Dorothy, Richard was helping Emily, now 15, organize a school project about psychological manipulation in family relationships. "Dad, can I use our story as the basis for the project?" asked Emily. "Do you feel comfortable talking about this publicly?" "Yes. I think our experience can help other people identify signs of manipulation." Richard felt proud seeing how Emily had transformed trauma into an educational tool. "Emily, what would you say to a child going through something similar to what you went through?" "I would tell her to trust her own feelings. If something makes her uncomfortable, even if adults say it's normal, she should tell someone she trusts. And if the adults say it's a secret, that's a red flag. Good adults don't ask children to keep secrets about things that affect their health or safety." Richard was impressed with Emily's clarity about healthy boundaries. Emily's project was so successful that she was invited to present it at other schools. At 15, she became a young voice in child protection education. During one of these presentations, a child in the audience raised their hand. "If adults who care about us do bad things, how do we know who to trust?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "It's really hard, but I learned that people who truly care about us respect our feelings and don't force us to do things that make us uncomfortable, and they always explain the reasons for things. They don't ask for secrets." After the presentation, Richard talked with Emily about how she felt helping other children. "It makes me feel like all that bad experience had a good purpose in the end," she said. "And how do you feel about Jennifer now?" asked Richard. "I like her. I know she loves me, but I also know that love isn't an excuse for doing wrong things. Both things can be true at the same time." Richard was impressed by the emotional sophistication Emily had developed. 8 years after the incident, Richard received an unexpected letter. It was from Dorothy, writing from prison. "Mr. Richard, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I think every day about the harm I caused Emily. I'm in therapy in prison, and understanding that my behavior came from a sick need to control people. I hope Emily is well and happy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I sincerely regret it." Richard showed the letter to Sarah, now his wife of 3 years. "What do you think I should do? It's your and Emily's decision. You're the ones who were harmed." Richard talked with Emily about the letter. She had grown into a mature and thoughtful 16-year-old young woman. "How do you feel, knowing Dorothy regrets it?" "I'm glad she understands she did something wrong. But that doesn't change what she did. Would you like to respond to her?" Emily thought for a long time. "Can I write a letter?" "Of course." Emily wrote a short but powerful letter. "Mrs. Dorothy, I'm glad to know you're working to become a better person. What you did taught me important things about trust and family protection. I hope that when you get out of prison, you use your experience to help real children, not to hurt them. I wish you find peace and a real family that loves you. Emily." Richard felt proud of the maturity and compassion Emily had shown. 9 years after the original incident, Richard was at Jennifer's wedding. She had met a man during group therapy and built a healthy relationship based on honesty about her past mistakes. "Richard, thank you for giving me the chance to rebuild my life. said Jennifer during the party. "Thank you for doing the inner work necessary to deserve that chance," replied Richard. "Emily inspired me greatly in this process. Seeing how she forgave me but maintained healthy boundaries, I learned that accountability and love can coexist." Richard looked at Emily, who was dancing with Sarah's son. At 17, she had become a wise, confident, and compassionate young woman. Jennifer Catherine would be proud seeing how Emily grew up and how we all learned to be a better family. "Richard, can I ask you something I've always wondered?" "Of course." "Have you completely forgiven me?" Richard thought about the question. "Jennifer, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or going back to how things were. It means choosing not to let anger control our future decisions. In that sense, yes, I've forgiven you. But our relationship now is different based on reality, not blind trust." "It's more than I deserve," said Jennifer. "It's what works for our family," replied Richard. 10 years after the incident with Dorothy, Richard was helping Emily prepare for her college entrance exams. She had decided to study psychology, inspired by her personal experience with manipulation and emotional recovery. "Dad, I want to specialize in child protection and family dynamics." "Because of what we went through?" "That too, but mainly because I learned that families can be healed when there are people willing to do the hard work of changing." Richard felt emotional, seeing how Emily had transformed personal trauma into professional vocation. "Daughter, are you sure you want to work with these issues? It can be emotionally heavy." "I'm sure, Dad. Our story taught me that it's possible to identify problems, protect children, and still keep families together when there's real love involved." On the eve of Emily's 18th birthday, Richard organized a party at home with all their friends and family. Jennifer was there, as well as Sarah and her son, and several people who had become important in their lives over the years. During the birthday speech, Emily surprised Richard. "Dad, I want to thank you for teaching me that family protection is an act of active love, not passive. You showed me that real parents don't just trust blindly, but verify, investigate, and act when something is wrong." Richard felt tears in his eyes, hearing his daughter speak with such eloquence. "I also learned that families can go through terrible crises and come out stronger as long as they choose honesty and real change, instead of denying problems or blaming others." The audience applauded, and Richard realized Emily had become an extraordinary young woman, not despite what she had been through, but because of how they had chosen to process and overcome it together. On Emily's 18th birthday, Richard took her to the notary's office to sign the documents for the trust fund he had created years earlier. "Daughter, you now have legal access to all the resources your mother left, plus the investments I made for your education. Dad, I'm not interested in the money right now. I want to finish college and build my career. And you will build it, daughter, but it's good to know you have financial security to make choices based on what you want, not what you need to survive." As they left the courthouse, they passed by the bakery where they used to have coffee during the first few months after discovering Dorothy's plan. Richard remembered how weak and pale Emily had been back then, and he looked at the healthy, vibrant young woman beside him. "Emily, do you remember how you felt during that time?" "Yes, I do. Tired, confused, afraid of bothering you. And always with the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what. And now? Now I know that when something seems wrong, it probably is wrong, and that I can trust you to help me find the truth." Richard realized he had given Emily something much more valuable than financial protection. He had taught her to trust her own instincts and to communicate discomfort without fear of judgment. 2 years later, Emily was in her 3rd year of psychology and interning at a non-profit that worked with child protection. Richard visited her at work for the first time. "How does it feel to be helping other families?" asked Richard. "Fulfilling. Every week I see at least one family going through some kind of manipulation or emotional abuse, and our experience helps me spot signs that other professionals sometimes miss." "What kind of signs?" "Children who get confused when asked about caregivers, adults who insist too much on specific medications or treatments, sudden behavior changes in children that coincide with new people arriving in the home." Richard felt proud seeing how Emily had transformed personal trauma into professional expertise. "Daughter, have you handled any cases similar to ours?" "A few, and I managed to help the families identify the problems before they became as serious as ours did." "How does it feel knowing you're protecting other children?" "I feel like all that bad experience had a greater purpose. As if Mom had planned for me to learn these lessons to help other people later." The reference to Catherine moved Richard. Emily had found a way to connect her mother's memory with her professional mission. That afternoon, Richard and Emily went to visit Catherine's grave, as they had done every month for over 10 years. "Mum, today I want to tell you that I finished my internship at the non-profit," said Emily, kneeling before the headstone, "and that Dad married a woman who reminds me of you, but in a good way." Richard listened silently as Emily told Catherine about the past few years, about the challenges overcome, and about plans for the future. "Mum, I want you to know that Dad learned to be the father you wanted him to be, and that I grew up strong like you wanted me to." On the way back home, Richard reflected with Emily. "Daughter, do you think Catherine would be proud of who we've become?" "I'm sure she would, Dad. She wanted you to be a present father, and for me to grow up secure and confident. We managed both. And do you think she would approve of our current family, with Sarah and Ethan?" "I think so. Mom always said love multiplies, it doesn't divide. Sarah isn't replacing her. She's adding love to our home." Richard was moved by Emily's wisdom about family dynamics. 3 years later, Richard was at Emily's psychology graduation. She had been chosen as the class speaker and would talk about family resilience and overcoming trauma. "I've learned in these years of study that families aren't broken by crises, but strengthened by how they choose to handle those crises," Emily said into the microphone. Richard was in the front row with Sarah, Ethan, and Jennifer, watching his daughter speak with authority about subjects she had lived through. Family manipulation happens when there's emotional absence that creates power vacuums. "These voids are filled by people who may have both good and bad intentions," Emily continued. Richard realized she was describing exactly what had happened in their family years ago. After graduation, during the celebratory dinner at home, Emily announced her plans for the future. "Dad, I received an offer to work at an NGO that helps families affected by domestic manipulation. It's in Washington, D.C. Richard felt a mix of pride and apprehension. "Washington, D.C.? Does that mean you're moving away?" "For 2 years. It's an opportunity to work with complex cases and learn from experienced professionals." Sarah placed her hand on Richard's arm. "It's an amazing opportunity, Emily. You're ready for this." "Dad, I know it's hard to see me go, but you taught me that growth sometimes requires courage to step out of your comfort zone." Richard smiled sadly. "You're right. And it will be easier for me this time because I know we've built a solid foundation. Wherever you are, our connection will remain strong." Ethan, now 22 and an engineering graduate, raised a toast. "To Emily, who will make the world safer for children. And to Uncle Richard, who taught me that men can also be loving caregivers," Emily replied, looking affectionately at Richard. In the week before Emily's move to Washington, D.C., father and daughter took a special trip to Louisiana, where Dorothy claimed to have family. They wanted to visit the places she had mentioned in her lies as a form of symbolic closure. "Dad, why did you want to come here?" asked Emily, as they walked through the French Quarter in New Orleans. "Because I want you to see that the stories Dorothy told about having family here were made up. I want you to fully understand how the manipulations she used work." They talked to local residents, visited the neighborhood Dorothy had mentioned as her childhood home. No one knew the Williams family in the area. "It's strange how she invented an entire life just to gain our trust," Emily observed. "And it's important for you to understand this for your future work. Professional manipulators create complex and convincing stories. They're not just simple lies." During the trip, Richard and Emily had deep conversations about forgiveness, justice, and second chances. "Dad, do you think it was right to give Aunt Jennifer a second chance but not Dorothy?" "What do you think?" "I think the difference is that Jennifer acted out of confused love, but Dorothy acted out of self-interest. Both were wrong, but their motivations were different." "Exactly. And Jennifer showed real capacity for change and remorse. Dorothy only showed remorse when she was arrested. But do you think people like Dorothy can really change? Richard reflected on the question. I think all people have the potential to change, but some need serious consequences to start that process, and some never truly manage to change. How do we tell the difference? By observing consistent actions over time, not just words of apology. Back in Los Angeles, Richard helped Emily move to Washington, D.C. The apartment she had rented was small but cozy, close to work. Dad, thank you for everything you taught me about protection and trust. Thank you for teaching me to be a better father, my dear. Richard returned to Los Angeles, feeling a natural emptiness but also immense pride. Emily was prepared for the world because they had faced together one of the worst situations a family can experience. 2 years later, Emily returned to Los Angeles with valuable experience and a job offer from a local NGO that had heard about her work in Washington, D.C. Dad, I want to come home. Washington, D.C. taught me a lot, but my family is here. Richard was thinner, with graying hair that hadn't been there when Emily left, but his eyes shone with happiness. This house was always yours, my daughter, and now you return as a professional ready to make a real difference. During the welcome dinner, Emily talked about the cases she had handled in Washington, D.C. Dad, in 2 years, we helped 23 families identify and resolve situations of domestic manipulation, and in 12 cases, we managed to keep the families together after solving the problems. Just like our family, observed Sarah. Exactly. I learned that most family problems can be solved with honest communication, healthy boundaries, and a real willingness to change. Richard asked what had impacted Emily the most professionally. Discovering how many children are victims of manipulation by people close to them, not strangers. Nannies, relatives, even teachers who abuse the family's trust. And what's the hardest part of the job? Convincing parents to accept that people they trust might be harming their children. Many prefer to deny reality rather than face that possibility. Richard remembered his own initial resistance to accepting that Dorothy and Jennifer were working against Emily's interests. 3 months after Emily's return, Richard received a call that took him by surprise. It was a lawyer representing Dorothy. Mr. Thompson, my client wants to propose an out-of-court settlement. What kind of settlement? She wants to provide financial restitution for the damages caused to your family. She is willing to pay for psychological treatment for your daughter and compensation for the trauma suffered. Richard talked with Sarah and Emily about the proposal. What do you think? Dad, I don't need her money. And I've already resolved my trauma, said Emily. But maybe she needs to do this for her own recovery. How so? In the therapy I had during college, I learned that sometimes people who caused harm need to make concrete amends to be able to forgive themselves. Richard was impressed with Emily's mature psychological perspective. So you think we should accept? I think we can accept the money and donate it to the NGO where I work. That way she makes her amends and other children benefit. Richard approved the idea. They accepted Dorothy's proposal and donated the entire amount to child protection programs. When she learned of the donation, Dorothy sent a second letter. Mr. Thompson and Emily, I heard you donated my restitution to help other children. This showed me your character and makes me feel even worse for what I did. But it also gives me hope that the harm I caused is being turned into something good. I am now working at a shelter for underprivileged children, trying to give back to the world a little of what I took. Thank you for giving me the chance to make amends for my mistakes. Emily decided to write back again. Mrs. Williams, I am happy to know you are using your experience to protect children instead of harming them. That is true change. Our family wishes you success on this new path. Richard admired Emily's ability to see potential for redemption even in people who had caused her harm. 4 years after Emily's return, Richard was at her wedding ceremony to a co-worker from the NGO. Michael was also a psychologist, specializing in family therapy, and had won the approval of the entire family. Richard, thank you for raising such a strong and wise woman, Michael said during the celebration. Michael, thank you for loving my daughter the way she deserves to be loved. During his father of the bride speech, Richard reflected publicly on the journey they had shared. Emily taught me that protecting someone doesn't mean controlling them, but rather giving them the tools to protect themselves. Today, seeing her marry someone who shares her values and her mission of family protection, I know she is ready to build her own strong family. Emily cried during the speech, and Richard realized he had managed to become the father Catherine wanted him to be. 5 years after Emily's wedding, Richard received a call that moved him deeply. "Daddy, I have news for you," said Emily, beaming. "I'm listening, sweetheart." "You're going to be a grandfather. Michael and I are expecting a baby." Richard felt tears instantly well up in his eyes. "Emily, that's wonderful." "Dad, I want you to know that you're going to be the kind of grandfather I always dreamed of having. Present, caring, protective, but not controlling. And you're going to be the kind of mother Catherine wanted you to be," Richard replied. During Emily's pregnancy months, Richard prepared to be a grandfather with the same dedication he had learned to apply to fatherhood. He read books on child development, took courses on home safety, and set up a nursery for the baby in his home. "Richard, you're more excited than the expectant mother herself," Sarah joked, watching him assemble the crib. "It's just that now I know how to do things differently from the start. I won't repeat the mistakes I made with Emily." "What mistakes?" "Mainly thinking that love is expressed only through financial provision. This time I'll be there from day one." When the baby was born, a girl named Catherine in honor of her grandmother, Richard was in the delivery room next to Michael. "Daddy, do you want to hold her first?" offered Emily. Richard took his granddaughter in his arms, looking at the little eyes that reminded him so much of both Catherine and Emily. "Hello, little Catherine. I'm your grandfather, Richard. I promised to be there for you in a way that took me a long time to learn how to be for your mother." Emily smiled through her tears. "Dad, you learned so well that you became the best example I know of how a man can change and grow." In the first months of little Catherine's life, Richard balanced being a present grandfather with giving Emily and Michael space to develop their own dynamic as parents. "Emily, how can I help without interfering too much?" Richard asked during a visit. "Dad, you can help by being exactly who you are now, present when we need you, respectful of our boundaries, and always available to talk. And if I notice something you haven't noticed, like when you were little, then you talk to us directly as adults. There's no more need for secret investigations because now we have open communication." Richard realized that the experience with Dorothy had taught the whole family the importance of direct and honest communication. 2 years later, Richard was playing with little Catherine in the park when she said her first full words, "Grandpa good." Richard melted. At 60, he was experiencing a fatherhood, grandfatherhood he hadn't fully achieved with Emily. "Michael, can I ask you a father-in-law to son-in-law question?" Richard said during a family barbecue. "Of course, Richard. How do you ensure that little Catherine will grow up emotionally secure?" "By following the example you and Emily gave me. Presence, communication, attention to signs, and willingness to change when necessary. And if someone shows up offering suspicious help, we apply everything you learned. Background checks, observing behaviors, trusting the child's instincts, and most importantly, maintaining open communication." Richard felt at ease knowing that the lessons from his experience were being passed on to the next generation. 3 years later, Richard was retired and devoted most of his time to being a grandfather and helping Emily with her NGO. He had become a reference in family manipulation prevention and regularly gave talks to parent groups. "Richard, your story continues to impact families," said Dr. Roberts during a casual meeting. "Just yesterday, a mother came to me saying she heard your talk and identified suspicious signs in her nanny." "And was she able to resolve the situation?" "Yes, it was an early case, much less severe than yours, but it could have turned bad if not identified early." Richard felt fulfilled knowing his experience was preventing other family tragedies. During an afternoon at home, little Catherine, now 4 years old, asked an innocent question that brought back deep memories. "Grandpa, why do I have the same name as the grandma who died?" Richard knelt down to the girl's height. "Because your grandma Catherine was a very special person, And your parents wanted you to carry her name as a way to keep alive the memory of the love she had for the family. Was she like me? In many ways, yes. She was caring, smart, and brave, just like your being. And would she have liked me? She would have loved you madly, replied Richard, hugging his granddaughter. At that moment, Richard realized he had managed to create a healthy emotional legacy that passed from Catherine to Emily, and now to little Catherine. The family had healed and grown through the generations. One afternoon, Richard was in the backyard pushing little Catherine on the swing when Emily came home from work with a worried expression. "Dad, I need to tell you something serious that happened at work today." Richard stopped the swing. "What is it?" "We assisted a family where the situation is almost identical to what we went through. A nanny medicating a child, a close relative involved, mysterious symptoms. And were you able to help?" "Yes, because I recognized all the signs immediately. The family accepted our guidance and removed the nanny before there was serious harm." "How did it feel reliving our story through another family?" "Grateful. Grateful that we went through that, because it allowed me to save another child today." Richard hugged Emily, realizing all the pain from the past had transformed into a protection tool for other families. That evening, during dinner, Richard reflected with the whole family present. "You know, sometimes I think our experience with Dorothy, as terrible as it was, taught us lessons that many families never learn." "What lessons?" asked Michael. "That true love includes active protection. That trust must be based on actions, not just feelings. And that strong families are built through honest communication, even when it's difficult." Sarah nodded. "And also that real change is possible when people are willing to do the necessary inner work." "Like you did, Dad," said Emily. "You completely restructured your life and priorities. And like you did too, daughter. You transformed trauma into professional vocation." Little Catherine, who had been quietly playing with her toys, looked at the adults. "Is family when people really take care of each other?" she asked with the profound simplicity of children. "Exactly, my princess," replied Richard. "Family is when people choose to take care of each other because they want to, not because they have to." 6 months later, Richard was organizing a special party, the 20-year anniversary of the discovery of Dorothy's plan. It wasn't a celebration of the crisis, but rather a commemoration of the family transformation that resulted from it. "Dad, it's strange to celebrate something that started so badly," commented Emily. "We're not celebrating what Dorothy did. We're celebrating what we chose to do afterward." The party gathered all the people who had been important in the recovery journey: Dr. Roberts, Jack, Dr. Bennett, Mrs. Eleanor, who had practically become family, Jennifer, and several families that Richard had helped over the years through talks and guidance. During the party, Jennifer approached Richard with an emotional expression. "Richard, I want you to know that these 20 years have completely transformed me. The therapy, the psychological support, seeing how you and Emily forgave me but maintained boundaries, all of that taught me to be a better person. Jennifer, you worked very hard for this transformation. It wasn't a gift you received, it was something you earned. And I want you to know that I will never again put my problems ahead of a child's well-being. I've learned that true love sometimes means accepting that other people know better how to care for those we love." Richard hugged Jennifer, realizing she had truly become a different person over the years. "Jennifer, Catherine would be proud to see how you've grown and how our family has grown too." During the party, several people shared how the Thompson family's story had impacted their own lives. Richard realized that his experience had become a source of inspiration and education for many other families. "Richard, your willingness to admit mistakes and make radical changes has inspired many of us to look at our own failings as parents," said one of the friends. "And Emily has become an example of how children can overcome trauma when they have proper family support," added another. That night, after everyone had left, Richard was tidying up the house when he found little Catherine sleeping on the sofa. He carefully carried her to her room, remembering similar nights with Emily 20 years earlier. "Grandpa, will you be here when I wake up?" murmured a sleepy Catherine. "Always, princess. Always." Richard tucked his granddaughter into bed and sat for a few minutes watching her sleep. 20 years ago, he had almost lost Emily by not being present enough. Now, he had the chance to be the grandfather he wished he had been as a father from the start. The next day, Richard received a call from Jack with surprising news. "Richard, Dorothy passed away last week." Richard felt a complex mix of emotions. "How?" "Natural causes, heart problems. But she left a will letter addressed specifically to you and Emily." "What does it say?" She offers final apologies and explains that her last years working with underprivileged children helped her understand the gravity of what she had done. She also left a small inheritance to the NGO where Emily works. Richard shared the news with Emily that evening. "How do you feel knowing she's gone?" asked Richard. "Sad. Sad because she never managed to have a real family. And sad because she had to go through prison and loneliness to learn lessons she could have learned in other ways." "But do you regret that we reported her?" "No, Dad, it was necessary. But that doesn't mean I can't feel compassion for the lonely person that existed behind the criminal." Richard hugged Emily, impressed once again by her ability to maintain a human perspective in complex situations. Dorothy's will letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was long and emotional. "Richard and Emily, I write this letter knowing it may be my last communication with you. I want you to know that the last 5 years working with abandoned children have taught me the real value of what I tried to destroy in your family. I've seen hundreds of children who don't have present parents, who don't have protection, who don't have true love. And I understood that Emily had all of those things, and I almost destroyed it out of greed and envy. Yes, envy. I never had a real family, I was never genuinely loved, and when I saw the imperfect but true love between you, I wanted to destroy it because I couldn't have it. My remorse is real. I used my last years trying to protect children who had no one as a way to make up for the harm I caused the child who had everything. I leave my small inheritance to Emily's NGO because I know she will use it to protect other children. Thank you for giving me the chance to redeem myself, even when I didn't deserve it. Dorothy," Emily cried while reading the letter. "Dad, she finally understood what she truly did and found a way to turn her guilt into something positive. Do you think we should go to her funeral?" Richard thought about the question. "What does your heart say?" "That we should go, not to forgive, because we forgave her years ago, but to honor the person she became in the end." At Dorothy's funeral, Richard and Emily were the only people besides the staff from the shelter where she worked. There was no family, no old friends. "It's sad to think she lived her whole life without having the kind of love she tried to destroy in our family," observed Emily. "And inspiring to know she used her last years to give children the care she never received," replied Richard. On the way back from the funeral, they stopped at Catherine's grave. "Mom, today we buried the woman who almost destroyed our family. But we also buried proof that people can change if they have the opportunity and willingness," said Emily. Richard placed fresh flowers on the grave. "Catherine, our family is complete now. We managed to create the legacy of love you wanted us to leave for future generations." 2 years later, Richard was in the hospital holding his second grandchild, a boy named Ethan, in honor of the stepson who had become a son of his heart. "Grandpa, now you have a pair of grandchildren to spoil," joked Emily. "And I'll spoil them with presents, not just with presents," replied Richard. Michael laughed. "Richard, you've become the grandfather standard all men of our generation should follow." I learned late, but I learned well. During the following months, Richard dedicated himself to being a grandfather even more intensely. He took care of the grandchildren 2 afternoons a week, so Emily and Michael could work, taught games that Catherine had taught him, and created memories he hoped the children would carry into adulthood. One day, little Catherine, now 6 years old, asked a question that brought the past back. "Grandpa, my mom said that when she was little, a bad nanny tried to hurt her. Is that true?" Richard looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "It's true, Catherine. A woman who seemed good was making your mom feel bad." "How did you find out?" "Because I paid attention when your mom started feeling different, and because your mom was brave enough to tell me when something bothered her. And now she can't hurt children anymore." "No, she can't. She learned she was wrong and spent the last years of her life protecting children instead of hurting them. Can bad people become good people? Richard thought carefully about the answer. People who do bad things can learn to do good things, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of inner work. Like Grandpa learned to be a better dad? Catherine's innocent question touched Richard deeply. Just like Princess, your grandpa also had to learn to be better. That afternoon, Richard reflected on how little Catherine was growing up in an environment of complete emotional security, something he hadn't been able to provide for Emily at the same age. It was comforting to know he had broken a cycle of male emotional absence in his family. 3 years later, Richard was at little Catherine's school dance recital. The girl moved across the stage with the same grace Richard remembered from photos of his wife, Catherine. "Grandpa, did you see my whole performance?" Catherine asked afterward. "Every second, Princess, and I filmed it all to show your brother when he's older. And to show Grandma Catherine at the cemetery?" Richard smiled. Emily had taught the children to include their grandmother's memory in important celebrations, visiting her grave to tell her the news. "We'll tell her everything on Sunday," Richard promised. During these regular visits to the cemetery, Richard was always surprised by the children's observations. "Grandpa, is Grandma Catherine happy knowing the family has grown?" asked Ethan at 5 years old. "I'm sure she is. She always wanted our family to be full of love and true care." "And does she know you turned into a cool grandpa?" Richard laughed. "I hope so, Ethan. I hope she knows I finally learned to be the family man she wanted me to be." A year later, Richard turned 70, and the family threw a special party. During her speech, Emily spoke about her father's transformation over the decades. "My father taught me it's never too late to change, that men can learn to be emotional caregivers, and that family protection is an act of active, present love." "Moved," Richard replied. "And my daughter taught me that children are resilient when they have a solid family foundation, that true forgiveness includes healthy boundaries, and that it's possible to turn trauma into strength to help others." Little Catherine, now 9, approached the microphone. "And I learned that families are made of people who choose to be together and protect each other, not just people who are related," she said with adorable seriousness. Ethan, at 7, added, "And that grandpas can be parents too when the real parents aren't here." Richard was moved to see how the children had internalized such deep concepts about healthy family dynamics. 2 years later, Richard attended little Catherine's high school graduation. She had decided to follow in her mother's footsteps and study psychology, focusing on preventing child manipulation. "Grandpa, I want to work so no child goes through what my mum went through," Catherine said during the celebration dinner. "Catherine, that means our story will keep protecting children for another generation," Richard observed. "It's the best legacy we can leave," Emily agreed. Richard looked around the table. Emily, Michael, Sarah, Ethan, little Catherine, and Jennifer, who had become a loving, respectful, adoptive grandmother who honored boundaries. He had managed to build exactly the kind of family Catherine had dreamed of: united, present, protected, and protective. The night before Catherine left for college, Richard had a special talk with his granddaughter. "Catherine, is there any question about our family story you've never asked?" "Yes, Grandpa. Are you afraid I might go through something similar?" Richard smiled. "No, Princess, because you grew up knowing how to spot manipulation, how to communicate discomfort, and knowing you can always trust our family. Dorothy only managed to manipulate your mother because your mother didn't have those tools back then. What if someone tries to manipulate me in college? You'll recognize the signs, trust your instincts, and tell us immediately, and we'll support you without question." "Promise you won't worry too much?" Richard laughed. "We'll worry just the right amount, the kind of worry that protects, not controls." On move-in morning, the whole family accompanied Catherine to the university in Chicago. Richard helped set up her dorm room, remembering when he had helped Emily 25 years earlier. "Grandpa, thank you for teaching me that I can trust you with any problem," said Catherine as she said goodbye. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be the grandfather I couldn't be as a father the first time," replied Richard. A year later, Catherine called home with news that worried the whole family. "Grandpa, there's a situation here at the university that reminded me of our story." "What's going on?" A roommate is going through something suspicious with a lady who offered to take care of her because her parents live far away. The girl is always tired, and this lady keeps offering her teas and vitamins. Richard immediately became alert. Catherine, have you talked to the university authorities? Not yet. My friend is afraid she might be overreacting, but the symptoms are very similar to what Mom had. Catherine, trust your instincts. If it looks like manipulation, it probably is. What should I do? Convince your friend to seek official help and keep a record of everything that's happening. Catherine and her friend followed Richard's advice. The investigation revealed that the lady in question was indeed trying to create emotional and physical dependency in the student to later blackmail her financially. Grandpa, we managed to protect my friend because you taught us to recognize the signs, Catherine shared a few weeks later. Richard felt proud knowing that his family's lessons were protecting a new generation. 2 years after the university incident, Catherine was back in Los Angeles to intern at Emily's NGO. It was the third generation of the family working in family protection. Mom, is it weird working in the same place as you? Asked Catherine. Actually, it's inspiring. Seeing you naturally apply concepts that took me years to learn shows me that our family has truly broken negative cycles. Richard watched from afar the professional development of the two women, feeling fulfilled for having created a legacy of protection and care. One afternoon, while working in the garden with Ethan, now a teenager, Richard reflected on family cycles. Grandpa, do you think I'll be a good dad when I grow up? Asked Ethan. Ethan, you're growing up seeing examples of present fatherhood every day. You'll be a better father than I was initially. How do you know? Because you're learning from childhood that men can be emotional caregivers. I had to learn that at 40. What if I make mistakes as a father? You will, Ethan, all parents do. But the important thing is to be willing to recognize and correct mistakes when they happen. Richard realized he was passing on to Ethan lessons he wished he had learned decades earlier. 3 years later, Richard was hospitalized with heart problems. Nothing serious, but it required a few days of observation. During that time, he could see how his family organized themselves to care for him. Emily took over medical coordination. Catherine came from Chicago to stay for a few days. Michael and Sarah took turns visiting, and even Jennifer showed up with flowers and genuine words of affection. Richard, seeing all these years how our family functions makes me sure we've built something truly special, said Sarah during a visit. Something we almost lost because of my absence and the manipulation of ill-intentioned people, replied Richard, but which we saved through honest communication and a willingness for real change. Ethan, now 15, approached the hospital bed. Grandpa, you're going to be okay, right? I still have so much to learn from you. I'll be okay, Ethan. And you've already learned the most important lessons, that family is built through presence and genuine care. During the days in the hospital, Richard received visits from dozens of people whose families had been impacted by his story and guidance over the years. He realized that his experience had become a legacy of protection that extended far beyond his own family. 1 month after being discharged from the hospital, Richard was at home recovering when he received a special phone call. Mr. Thompson, I'm a producer of a documentary about family manipulation in Brazil. I would like to include your story as an example of overcoming and successful protection. Richard discussed the proposal with the family. Everyone agreed that sharing the experience in a broader format could help even more families. Dad, our story has already helped hundreds of people through your lectures and the work of Catherine and me. A documentary could reach thousands, argued Emily. Richard agreed to participate in the documentary, which was released 2 years later with great national impact. Hundreds of families got in touch reporting that they had identified suspicious situations in their homes after watching the film. Richard, the documentary is already being used in training for social workers and family psychologists, informed the producer during the premiere. Richard felt fulfilled, knowing that his experience had become a professional educational tool. 5 years later, Richard was 78 years old, watching young Catherine graduate in psychology and Ethan enter college for education. Both had chosen careers focused on child protection and development. Grandpa, you created a dynasty of family protectors. joked Catherine during the graduation party. "You chose this on your own. I just showed that it was possible to turn bad experiences into tools of protection." Emily, now 38 years old and director of the NGO, approached with special news. "Dad, we're going to open a new branch of the NGO in New Orleans. We want to work exactly in the region where Dorothy claimed to have family, as a way to honor her memory by turning that place into a real center of protection." Richard was moved by the symbolism of the initiative. Catherine would be proud of this decision. "And Dorothy would be too, I think," added young Catherine. "She always wanted a family in Louisiana. Now she'll have a family of protected children there." Richard hugged the two Catherines of his life, realizing that he had managed to create a cycle of protection that would continue for generations. On his 80th birthday, Richard was in the garden of his house watching his grandchildren, now adults, play with their own children. 4 generations gathered in harmony, all carrying the lessons learned through the crisis with Dorothy. "Great-grandpa, tell the story again about the bad nanny who turned good in the end," asked the 5-year-old great-granddaughter. Richard smiled, realizing that his experience had become a family legend passed down through the generations, but always with the central message that protection, communication, and real change are possible. "Once upon a time, there was a father who was so busy working that he almost didn't notice when his little daughter was in danger," began Richard, telling once again the story that had defined his family's destiny. As he spoke, Richard looked around. Emily now running a national family protection network, Catherine beginning her career as a child therapist, Ethan preparing to be an elementary school teacher, Sarah still by his side after more than 20 years together, Jennifer integrated into the family as a respected and caring grandmother. He had managed to build exactly the type of legacy that Catherine had dreamed of, a family that protects itself, grows together, and extends protection to other families. "And did they all live happily ever after?" asked the great-granddaughter. "They all learned to live in a way that they can be truly happy," corrected Richard, "because real happiness comes from being present for those we love." That night, after everyone had left, Richard sat on the terrace with Sarah, watching the lights of Manhattan Beach. "Richard, do you have any regrets about how we handled that whole situation?" Richard thought about the question. "Just one. It took me so long to become the father Emily needed from the beginning. But you did become that, and it made all the difference. And what about you, Carol? Do you regret joining this complicated family?" Sarah laughed. "Richard, complicated families that solve their problems with love are far better than simple families that pretend problems don't exist." Richard agreed, embracing his wife and thinking of Catherine, his first wife, who had planted the seeds of the man he became. At 83, Richard was bedridden with health issues, but still lucid and constantly surrounded by family. Emily had taken leave from work to care for him, and Catherine had returned from Chicago to help. "Dad, would you like me to read something to you?" offered Emily. "You can read that letter Dorothy left. I want to hear it again." Emily read Dorothy's testamentary letter, and Richard closed his eyes, processing once more that woman's regret. "Dad, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that all the people in our story found some kind of redemption in the end. Dorothy learned to protect children. Jennifer learned to love without manipulating. I learned to be present. You turned trauma into vocation. And what does that mean? That our family achieved something rare, turning a destructive crisis into constructive growth for everyone involved." Catherine approached the bed. "Great-grandpa, do you want me to continue your work giving lectures on family protection?" Richard smiled. "I want you all to continue the work of protecting families, each in the way that makes sense to you. The important thing is to keep alive the message that emotional presence is the foundation of all protection." 3 days later, Richard passed away at home, surrounded by his entire family. His last words were to Emily. "Daughter, we managed to create the family your mother dreamed of." Richard's funeral gathered hundreds of people, families he had helped over the years, professionals who had learned from his experience, and children who had been protected thanks to the lessons his story had taught. During the speech at the cemetery, Emily reflected on her father's legacy. "My father taught me that family protection isn't just an instinct, It's a skill that can be learned and perfected, that it's never too late to change, and that real change always requires sacrifice and inner work. Catherine added, and he taught us that families are built through daily choices to be present, to protect and to communicate honestly. Ethan, now a graduate in education and working with at-risk children, concluded, Grandpa Richard showed us that true masculinity includes active emotional care, and that men can be protectors without being controllers. After the funeral, the family gathered at home to share memories of Richard. Jennifer, now a 65-year-old lady, made a reflection that touched everyone. Richard gave me something I never thought I deserved after what I did. A real second chance. Not just forgiveness, but the opportunity to redeem myself through consistent actions over the years. And what did you learn in that process, Gunn? Asked Emily. That regret without behavior change is just self-pity. But regret that leads to real transformation can heal relationships that seemed impossible to repair. Sarah remembered the first time she met Richard. He always said he had learned to be a father too late, but I saw a man who had learned to be a father just in time to save his daughter and build a healthy family. 6 months after Richard's passing, the family decided to create a foundation in his memory. The Richard Thompson Family Protection Foundation would offer free training for parents on identifying domestic manipulation and building healthy family communication. Dad, I think Daddy would be proud knowing his experience turned into an institution that will protect families forever, said Emily during the inauguration ceremony. The foundation grew quickly, receiving support from companies and individuals who had been impacted by the Thompson family's story. Within 5 years, it had helped over 1,000 families identify and resolve situations of domestic manipulation. Catherine, now a licensed psychologist, became the foundation's technical director. Ethan developed educational programs for schools about healthy family communication. Emily coordinated the national expansion of services. 10 years after Richard's death, the family gathered at the cemetery to mark the date. 3 generations were represented: Emily and Michael, Catherine and Ethan with their respective spouses and children, and Sarah, who had become the family's respected matriarch. Grandpa Richard, today our foundation opened its 100th branch in the country, reported little Catherine, now grown up to the grave. And we've identified over 15,000 cases of family manipulation that were resolved without permanent trauma to the children, added Ethan. Emily concluded, Dad, we managed to turn our pain into protection for thousands of families. Catherine would be proud of the legacy we built together. That afternoon, walking back from the cemetery, the 4 generations of the Thompson family reflected on how a terrible crisis had turned into the foundation for decades of family protection and love. Great-Grandma Sarah, do you think Great-Grandpa Richard imagined our story would help so many people? Asked one of the great-granddaughters. I think he just wanted to protect his daughter, but he ended up teaching the whole world how to do it, replied Sarah. And showed that men can learn to truly care, not just provide, added Catherine. And that families can emerge stronger from crises when they choose to face them together, concluded Emily. As they walked through the streets of Manhattan Beach, 4 generations united by lessons learned through overcoming challenges. Each family member carried with them the certainty that family protection is a legacy built daily through presence, communication, and active love. The story that had begun with suspicious soup and an absent father had transformed into a family saga of transformation, protection, and love that would continue impacting future generations. End of story. So, what did you think of this family overcoming story? Do you believe Richard made the right decisions to protect Emily? Share in the comments if you've been through a similar situation and how you resolved it. Leave a like if the story touched you, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about families overcoming challenges together.